She had loved him for 6 years. 6 years of 2 a.m. phone calls. 6 years of laughing at his terrible jokes, wiping tears she never let him see, watching him fall for women who were never quite right, and pretending she was fine with all of it. Victoria Sterling had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. She had sat across from presidents, negotiated with sharks, and never once flinched. But loving Logan Hayes in silence? That nearly broke her. And tonight, the night he finally heard everything, nothing would ever be the same again. If this story already has your heart racing, hit like, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. The rain had been falling since noon. By 9 o'clock that Tuesday evening, Seattle had turned into the kind of wet, gray blur that made you want to cancel everything and stay inside with a blanket and bad television. The streets outside reflected 1,000 smeared headlights. The Space Needle was half swallowed by low cloud. The whole city felt like it was holding its breath. Logan Hayes was driving home from what had been, without question, the worst first date of his adult life. It hadn't been catastrophic in any dramatic way. Nobody had thrown a drink. Nobody had said something unforgivable. It had been worse than that. It had been profoundly, suffocatingly boring. 2 hours at an Italian restaurant on Capitol Hill, pushing pasta around a plate, nodding along to a woman named Diane, who spent 45 minutes describing her feelings about open-concept floor plans. She was attractive. She had a stable job. She seemed like someone who would remember to water plants. Logan had spent the last 20 minutes of dinner mentally composing the polite text he'd send later, explaining that he didn't feel a connection, which was absolutely true, and told her almost nothing about why. He was 32 years old. He had a 6-year-old daughter named Maya, who had recently decided that her life's purpose was to collect every stray cat in their neighborhood and smuggle them into the house. He had a decent job as a structural engineer, a small house in Fremont with one pipe that made a sound like someone dying every time the heat kicked on, and a group of friends who had mostly stopped inviting him to couples' dinners out of what he suspected was a mixture of pity and logistical annoyance. He was, by any reasonable measure, a man who had his life together. Mostly, in the important ways. What he didn't have was someone. He turned onto his street and sat in the parked car for a moment before going inside. The engine ticking as it cooled, rain drumming on the roof in a way that was either soothing or depressing depending on your mood. Tonight, it was depressing. His phone lit up on the passenger seat. Victoria. How was it? He stared at the message. She always knew. He had no idea how she always knew, whether she tracked his calendar or simply possessed some sixth sense calibrated specifically to his disasters. But she was never wrong. He typed back. Define was. 3 seconds. Victoria. That bad? Logan. She described her kitchen renovation for 45 minutes. Victoria. The whole 45? Logan. She had photos. A pause. Then, Victoria, call me. He was already pressing her name before he'd finished reading it. Victoria Sterling picked up on the first ring, which was not something she did for anyone. She had people, actual, paid people, whose entire job description included managing the volume of calls that came into her life on any given day. She had an assistant named Claire who was frighteningly competent and who had developed a system involving 3 different levels of urgency flags. She had a PR director who handled the press, a legal team who handled the complicated things, and a personal security contractor who handled the rest. She picked up Logan's calls on the first ring. Kitchen renovation, she said by way of greeting. Marble countertops. He was already smiling, which was infuriating given how annoyed he'd been 30 seconds ago. Apparently the original contractor used the wrong thickness. I didn't know there were different thicknesses. There are several. She was walking. He could hear the soft sound of her footsteps on what he knew was the hardwood floor of her penthouse apartment in Belltown. She walked when she was on the phone. It was a habit she'd had as long as he'd known her. The industry standard for residential kitchens is typically Victoria. I'm kidding. She wasn't quite laughing, but there was something warm in her voice that was close enough. Was she terrible? No, he said honestly. That's the thing. She wasn't terrible at all. She was perfectly nice. She was. He stopped, tried to find the right word. Fine. A silence. Fine, Victoria repeated. Yeah. Logan. I know. You're never going to be happy with fine. He leaned his head back against the headrest. Outside the windshield, the rain kept falling, the street kept reflecting, and somewhere 2 houses down his neighbor's dog was barking at something that probably wasn't there. I don't know what I want, he said, and it came out more honest than he intended. Yes, you do. Her voice was quiet, not unkind, just matter-of-fact in the way she sometimes was, the way that cut through things without trying to. You just haven't figured out how to say it yet. He didn't ask her what she meant. He was too tired for that particular conversation. And also, he suspected that if he pulled on that thread, it would unravel something he wasn't ready to look at directly. So he did what he usually did. He changed the subject. How was your day? She made a sound that he had learned over 6 years, meant not great, but I don't want to make this about me. Productive, she said. That means bad. It means productive. A pause. The board meeting ran 3 hours. Marcus decided that the Q3 projections were a personal attack on his intelligence. Cynthia brought her emotional support water bottle and did not offer any actual emotional support. I don't know who Cynthia is. You don't need to. She's exhausting. And Marcus? Also exhausting. Another pause. My father called during lunch. Logan straightened slightly. Richard Sterling was a complicated subject, brilliant, demanding, proud in the particular way that old money families sometimes were. Proud of the empire, proud of the name, occasionally proud of Victoria in a way that had more to do with what she represented than who she actually was. He had built Sterling Technologies from a regional hardware company into something that had tentacles in 6 industries, then handed it to his daughter with the kind of ceremony that made it feel less like a gift and more like a throne she was expected to fill without complaint. What did he want? Just checking in. The way she said it meant it was more than that. He's been, I don't know. He mentioned some things about some of the East Coast divisions. Nothing concrete. You okay? Of course. Quick, automatic. The way she said it when she wasn't, but didn't want to get into it. He didn't push. That was one of the things they developed over 6 years. A fluency in what not to say. They knew each other's silences the way some people knew each other's faces. He knew when she was tired and calling it fine. She knew when he was lonely and calling it nothing. They had whole conversations in the spaces between sentences. Maya left me a note this morning, he said, and he could feel her interest shift, the way it always did when Maya came up. On my pillow, it said, Dad, I think there is a cat in the wall, please help her. Spelled phonetically. W-A-W-L. Victoria made a sound that was genuinely, helplessly delighted. Is there a cat in the wall? I don't know. I was too afraid to check. What did you do? I left a small dish of tuna near the baseboard. That's either very kind or you're going to have a serious problem by morning. Story of my life. He finally opened the car door, holding his jacket over his head in the way that accomplished absolutely nothing against actual rain. He jogged up the front path and let himself into the house, where the babysitter, a retired teacher named Carol, who lived 3 streets over and who Maya called Grandma Carol despite no biological connection whatsoever, was asleep on the couch with a nature documentary still running on the television. He lowered his voice. I'm inside. Carol's asleep. Pay her in cash and add 20%. I always do. I know. I'm just saying. He moved quietly through the house, checking on Maya the way he did every night, the way that had become so automatic it was almost muscle memory. His daughter was asleep with one arm hanging off the edge of the mattress and a stuffed elephant tucked under her chin that she had named Gerald for reasons she had never fully explained. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at her. She okay? Victoria asked softly. Yeah. He pulled the door almost shut. She's good. Good. He walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water he didn't really want, and leaned against the counter. Victoria. Do you think... I don't know. Do you think I'm too picky? A pause that lasted slightly too long. Why do you ask? Because Diane was objectively fine. She was nice, she had her stuff together, she wanted the same things I want, and I sat across from her for 2 hours and felt absolutely nothing. He set the glass down. Maybe I have unrealistic expectations. Maybe I've built up some idea in my head of what I want, and nothing real is ever going to match it. Another pause. Longer this time. I think, Victoria said carefully, that you know what it feels like to really connect with someone, and you're not willing to settle for less than that, which is not the same as being too picky. That sounds like the polite version. The impolite version is that you keep dating women who check boxes on paper and then wondering why it doesn't feel right. A beat. But I didn't say that. You just said that. I'm in your corner, Logan, whatever you decide. He smiled at the ceiling. You always say that. Because I always mean it. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. About Maya's school project on clouds that had somehow expanded into a small crisis involving glitter and a hairdryer. About a podcast Victoria had started listening to on her morning runs. About whether the Italian place on his street had gotten worse, or whether they'd both just gotten older and harder to impress. It was the kind of conversation that didn't need to be about anything. It existed for its own sake, for the simple fact of two people who liked each other's company making time to inhabit the same space, even from opposite sides of the city. Eventually he said he should let her go. He had an early meeting. She had, probably, a morning that started before sunrise. Sleep well, she said. You too. Actually sleep this time, not like last week. I slept last week. 4 hours is not sleep, Victoria. It's enough sleep for me. It is not enough sleep for anyone. She made the sound that meant she was smiling, but wouldn't admit it. Good night, Logan. Night. He ended the call. He set the phone on the kitchen counter and stood for a moment in the quiet of the house. The ticking of the old wall clock, the distant sound of rain against the windows, the particular specific silence of a house where a child is sleeping. He thought about what she'd said. You know what it feels like to really connect with someone. He thought about all the dates that had felt like job interviews. He thought about Diane and her countertops and the particular blankness he'd felt sitting across from her. He went to bed and fell asleep faster than he expected to. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that approximately 3 miles away, on the 32nd floor of a building in Belltown, a woman he had spoken to every day for 6 years was standing at a floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the same rain-soaked city, her phone still warm in her hand, not sleeping at all. So, Victoria Sterling had 3 rules she had given herself a long time ago. The first, never let business become personal. The second, always know your exit before you enter a room. The third, the one she had added specifically, quietly, without telling anyone, was this: don't. Just don't. Don't let yourself want what you can't have. Don't let a feeling grow into something you can't contain. Don't look at your best friend on a video call and catalog the exact way his face changes when he's trying not to laugh. Don't notice the particular sound of his voice when he's tired and being honest and not performing anything for anyone. Don't. She had been following that third rule for 6 years. It was, without question, the hardest thing she had ever done. And she had once negotiated a hostile takeover bid from a firm 3 times her company's size during a Christmas holiday, from a ski resort, using hotel Wi-Fi and a borrowed laptop. The feelings had started early, embarrassingly early, in retrospect. 3 months into the friendship, when he'd shown up to her office holiday party with Maya on his hip, because the babysitter had canceled and he hadn't known what to do, and he'd been so genuinely apologetic about it, so unassuming, just standing there in the lobby with his daughter asleep on his shoulder and his tie slightly crooked, saying, I know this is completely unprofessional. I can leave. And something had happened in her chest that she had immediately categorized, contained, and pretended was nothing. It wasn't nothing. She had known that even then. But Logan Hayes was her friend. Her actual, genuine, irreplaceable friend. The person who called after bad days and made her laugh, when she was running on empty, and who had absolutely no interest in her money or her name or what she could do for his career. who treated her like a person in a world that had mostly stopped doing that around the time she hit her first 100 million. She was not going to blow that up for feelings. So she learned to be careful. She learned to keep the warmth in her voice at a level that could pass for affectionate friendship. She learned to listen to the stories about dates and give the honest, helpful responses of a good friend, while privately cataloging every woman against a list of her own flaws, and finding the whole exercise appropriately painful. She learned to say, "I'm in your corner," and mean it so completely that there was no room left for resentment. She got very, very good at this. And then she had her video call system installed. The setup was Claire's idea, her assistant, efficient and practical as always. A whole integrated communication suite for the apartment, with cameras built into the screens, high-quality audio, everything designed to make remote meetings feel less remote. It worked beautifully. Victoria used it every day. She used it to call Logan. What she had not accounted for, what neither of them had ever thought about, was the disconnect feature. Or rather, the way the disconnect feature sometimes failed to work properly when the connection was dropped from one end while the other end's camera and microphone remained, technically, active. A software glitch. That was all it was. Logan's end disconnected. The call appeared to have ended on both screens. He set his laptop on the kitchen counter and went to check on Maya. And Victoria, standing at her window, phone in one hand and a glass of water in the other, said something she had never intended for anyone to hear. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. Claire had been in the hallway, passing through with a stack of files, and had knocked on the open door. A small, professional knock. "Do you need anything else before I head out?" "No, thank you. Get some sleep." Claire had hesitated. She was 26 and perceptive in a way that sometimes made Victoria feel slightly exposed. "Was that Logan?" Victoria turned from the window. "Good call?" "Same as always." She paused, looked at the darkened screen. "He had a bad date." Claire set the files on the side table, said nothing. She had been with Victoria for 2 years and had learned, correctly, that certain silences were the conversational equivalent of a yellow traffic light. You waited to see what happened next. What happened next was that Victoria sat down on the edge of the couch, set her water glass on the coffee table with the careful precision she used when she was trying not to feel something, and looked at her hands. "He keeps going on these dates," she said, "one after another, and he calls me after every single one, and every time I pick up and I listen and I tell him the right things, the honest things, the things a good friend says. And then I hang up and—" She stopped. "And?" Claire said quietly. Victoria looked up. Her expression was not the expression she wore in boardrooms or press conferences or negotiations. It was something more unguarded than that, something she only had when she was very tired or very honest or both. "I have been in love with him for 6 years," she said. Flat, simple, like a fact read from a balance sheet. "And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with any of it, because he is the best person I know, and I refuse to make it weird, and so I just keep being his friend. Every day I keep being his friend, because what else am I going to do?" She laughed. It was not a happy sound. "What else am I going to do, Claire? He has no idea. He's never had any idea. And that's fine. It has to be fine." She stood, smoothed her hands over her slacks in the practical, pulling herself together gesture that Claire knew well. "I'm going to go to bed. Thank you for today. I'll see you at 7. Claire nodded, said nothing, picked up the files she'd set down and walked toward the door. Marset. Logan Hayes heard every word. He had gone to check on Maya and found her already awake, or rather, almost awake, that half-conscious stage where she needed water and reassurance and the specific stuffed elephant without which the world was not right. By the time he'd gotten her resettled and come back to the kitchen, he'd noticed that the laptop screen was still faintly lit. He thought the call had ended. He was certain of it. He had seen the disconnect screen, but the microphone indicator was still green, still live. He stood in his kitchen in his coat that he hadn't taken off yet, rain-damp and tired, and he heard the woman who was his best friend tell someone else what she had apparently never been able to say to him. "I have been in love with him for 6 years. He did not move. The screen went dark. The connection finally dropped. He stood there for a long time after that. Long enough for the old clock on the wall to tick through a full 3 minutes. Long enough for the rain to shift slightly against the windows. Long enough for his hands to stop feeling strange. He sat down at the kitchen table, not on the couch, not in the comfortable chair, but at the kitchen table, in his coat, in the dark, and thought. The thing about hearing something like that is that it immediately does something to everything that came before. Every memory becomes a question. Every conversation turns over and shows you something on the other side that you didn't know was there. Victoria picking up on the first ring. Victoria always knowing when a date had gone badly. Victoria saying you know what it feels like to really connect with someone in a voice that had something underneath it he'd never examined because he hadn't thought to. Victoria listening to every failed relationship with the patience of someone who, he understood now, had probably been quietly, specifically, precisely pained by each one. 6 years. He thought about Diane and her kitchen countertops. He thought about the date before that. Sarah, who had been perfectly nice, and the one before that, Rachel, who had also been perfectly nice, and the whole series of perfectly nice women who had, without exception, left him feeling like something was missing and he couldn't name what. And he thought, you've been comparing them to someone. You just hadn't looked directly at who. He sat at that kitchen table for a long time. He didn't call anyone. He didn't do anything practical or sensible. He just sat with the specific weight of 6 years of missed things laid out now in a way he couldn't put back. Around midnight, he got up. He took off his coat and hung it on the hook by the door. He went into Maya's room and checked on her again. She was deeply asleep now, Gerald the elephant back in place, one small hand curled near her chin. He stood there for a moment. He went back to the kitchen, picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. He thought about calling. He thought about waiting until morning when things might feel less raw and immediate. He thought about the fact that morning was not something he was going to be able to reach without doing something, and that Victoria was 3 miles away in that penthouse, probably not sleeping, probably standing at that window looking at the same rain. He thought about 6 years of late-night calls, 6 years of her picking up on the first ring, 6 years of, I'm in your corner. He put on his coat. He called Carol before he left. She lived close enough that it took her 7 minutes to get to his door, and she arrived in a rain jacket and reading glasses and the specific expression of a woman who has decided to ask no questions, and she did not ask any. He told her Maya was asleep, that he'd be back in a couple of hours, that there was tea in the cabinet, and she could watch anything on the television. He drove through Seattle with the rain and the blurred headlights and the city that felt like it was holding its breath. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have words prepared, which for a man who had spent 6 years talking to this woman about everything felt both strange and somehow correct. You didn't need to prepare a speech for someone who already knew you. The parking structure under Victoria's building was underground and mostly empty at midnight. He took the elevator up to the lobby and spoke to the night security guard, a large, quiet man named Rennick, who had seen Logan often enough over the years to give him a nod and pick up the in-house phone without being asked. He heard Rennick say, "Mr. Hayes here, Miss Sterling." A pause. "Of course." Rennick hung up. "She says go ahead." The elevator to the 32nd floor was glass on one side and looked out over the city. Logan rode up watching Seattle get smaller below him, the wet streets, the chain of lights, the distant water, and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing because if he thought too hard about it, he might talk himself out of it, and he was 32 years old and he had already wasted 6 years not saying the thing, and he was not going to waste more. Victoria opened the door before he knocked. She was in what she wore when she wasn't being the CEO of anything, dark leggings, an oversized sweater that he recognized as one she'd had for years, hair out of its usual arrangement. She looked for just a moment, completely unguarded. Then she looked at his face and whatever color she'd had drained out of it. "Logan." Her voice was careful, controlled, the voice she used when she was managing something. "It's midnight. What?" "I heard you," he said. A silence. The kind of silence that fills up all the space in a room and leaves nowhere to stand. She went very still. He watched her, watched the thing move across her face, The sequence of it, the rapid internal calculation of a woman who had built an empire on her ability to read a room and respond correctly. He watched her try to find the angle that let her walk this back. What do you mean? What did you hear? I don't know what you're talking about. She was brilliant. She could have done it. She could have made him doubt himself. But she was also very tired, and she was looking at him standing in her doorway at midnight in a wet coat, and something in his face was telling her something that made the words leave her before she could arrange them into anything manageable. The camera was still on, he said. She closed her eyes. Victoria. Logan, She stopped. Started again. Whatever you heard, I don't want you to feel like you have to... Stop, he said, not unkindly, but firmly. She stopped. Can I come in? She stepped back from the door. The penthouse looked the way it always looked, well-designed and expensive and somehow, despite all that, genuinely lived in. There were papers on the coffee table, a coffee mug on the kitchen counter that he was fairly certain had been there since morning, a blanket on the couch that meant she'd been sitting there not sleeping, which he'd known. He didn't sit down. She didn't either. They stood in the living room. This room he'd been in hundreds of times for birthday dinners and Sunday mornings, and once memorably for an entire Saturday when a pipe in his house burst and Maya had spent the day drawing on Victoria's white walls with washable crayons, which Victoria had not only permitted but encouraged. They stood in this room, and neither of them seemed to know what to do with their hands. I'm not here because I feel sorry for you, he said. I want to be clear about that up front, because I know that's what you're thinking. She was looking at the middle distance slightly to the left of his shoulder. I'm not thinking anything. You're thinking I overheard something and now I'm here out of some kind of guilt and that I'm going to say something well-meaning that will make everything awkward and then we'll both have to pretend this never happened. A pause. Are you done describing my internal experience? Am I wrong? She looked at him directly then. Her eyes were, he noticed this, the way you notice something you should have been seeing for a long time, very serious. Not the serious of a boardroom or a press conference, the serious of someone who is standing very close to something that could hurt them. You are my best friend, she said. You are the most important person in my life, and you have been for 6 years, and I will not let one bad judgment call, one moment where I said something I should have kept to myself. I will not let that blow up what we have. So whatever you came here to say, if it's going to make things weird, I compared you to every woman I went on a date with. He said it straight out, the way he'd learned you had to sometimes. Just get it out before the sensible part of your brain arrived to complicate things. I didn't know that was what I was doing, but I was. Every one of them, and none of them were... He stopped, tried to find the right word, and found that the right word was so obvious it felt almost embarrassing. You. None of them were you. Victoria said nothing. I think I've been in love with you, he said, for a long time. And I think I did not look at it directly because looking at it directly felt, I don't know, impossible. He gestured vaguely at her apartment, at her, at the general situation. You're you, and I'm... Don't, she said. A single dad in Fremont with a broken heating pipe and a daughter who is attempting to adopt feral cats through the walls of our house. Logan? Her voice cracked slightly on his name, which was the only time he'd ever heard that happen. Don't talk about yourself like that. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. She looked at him with something he hadn't seen before, or hadn't let himself see. I'm not in love with your apartment. I'm not in love with your tax bracket. I've had 6 years of that from men who wanted to take me to the right restaurants and be seen with me, and... She stopped, pressed her lips together briefly, recovered. You called me after Maya got her first ear infection because you didn't know what to do and you were scared and you just needed to talk to someone. Do you remember that? He did. It was 3 a.m. She had a fever of 102 and you'd already been to urgent care and the doctor had given you everything you needed, but you needed to talk. And we talked for 2 hours. She said it quietly, not like she was making a point, just stating a fact. That's you. That's who you are. And that's... She stopped. He crossed the room. There was a moment, a specific, final moment, about 3 steps away from her. where both of them understood that something was ending and something else was starting, and there was no version of the next few seconds that returned them to where they'd been. 6 years of careful friendship. 6 years of the right amount of warmth and the right amount of distance and all the things unsaid. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. "I'm not here because of guilt," he said again quietly. "I'm here because I drove through the rain at midnight and I couldn't have told you not to if you'd tried. And that's the truest thing I know right now." Victoria Sterling, who had sat across from sharks and won, who had built things from nothing and defended them, who had spent 6 years being impeccably, exhaustingly careful, said nothing at all. She closed the distance. They stayed up until 3 in the morning. Not in any dramatic way. They made tea because that was what you did, and they sat at her kitchen table in the ordinary light of the kitchen, and they talked. Really talked. In the way they hadn't quite allowed themselves to before, with all the windows open that they'd kept carefully shut. She told him about the moment she'd realized it, 3 months in, him standing in a lobby with a sleeping child on his shoulder looking apologetic. And he laughed because it was exactly the most unlikely moment and also, somehow, perfect. He told her about the dates and the way each one had left him feeling subtly wrong in a way he'd kept trying to diagnose as the wrong person when it was maybe something else entirely. She told him she'd been furious at herself about it for years. He told her he thought that was extremely on brand. She threw a dish towel at him, which was the least CEO behavior he had ever witnessed from her, and he caught it, and they were laughing in her kitchen at 2 in the morning, and something in the air felt different than it ever had. Lighter, somehow, and more real. At some point she said carefully, This changes things." "Yeah," he agreed. "And I need you to know that if this doesn't—" She stopped. Started again. "If it turns out to be more complicated than tonight, Victoria. I'm serious. I'm not saying this to be—" "I know." He looked at her across the kitchen table, at the woman who picked up on the first ring, who knew before he said a word, who had listened to him for 6 years with a patience that he was only now fully understanding the cost of. "I know you're serious. I know you're scared. So am I." He paused. "But I drove here in the rain at midnight. I'm going to need you to work with me a little." She looked at him for a long moment. Then, "Your heating pipe still makes that noise?" "Every morning. I think it's getting worse." "I'll have someone look at it." "I don't need you to fix my heating pipe." "I know." A small smile. The real one. The one that didn't show up in press photos. "But I want to." Outside the windows, the rain had finally eased. Seattle was breathing again. The city lay below them, quiet and wet, the lights reflecting in 1,000 small puddles on empty streets. Logan Hayes sat in Victoria Sterling's kitchen at 2:43 in the morning and thought about 6 years and missed moments and the strange, specific mercy of a software glitch. He thought about Maya, asleep at home with Gerald the elephant. He thought about the pipe in the wall. He thought about all the wrong women and the right person who had been there, consistently, faithfully, stubbornly there, for the entire time. He stayed until the rain stopped. The thing nobody tells you about crossing a line you can't uncross is that the morning still comes. Logan drove home at 3:15 with the heater running and the city mostly empty and the particular feeling of someone who has done something irrevocable and isn't entirely sure yet whether irrevocable is good or terrifying. The streets were slick and dark. A delivery truck sat double-parked outside an all-night diner on Westlake. A traffic light cycled through its colors for nobody. Seattle at 3 in the morning was a different city. Quieter, smaller, stripped of the daily performance of itself. He drove and didn't turn on the radio. What had happened? What they had said and what they hadn't said, and the way she'd looked at him across the kitchen table in that ordinary light, kept replaying in fragments. Not linearly, more like the way songs get stuck in your head, a piece at a time. The dish towel. The real smile. I know, but I want to. He kept returning to that. The smallness of it, the specificity. Not some grand declaration, but a woman saying she wanted to fix his heating pipe, and meaning something else entirely, and both of them knowing it. Carol was asleep on the couch when he got home. He left $200 on the kitchen table, so, more than he'd said, more than he probably should have given the month he was having financially, and locked the door behind her when she left with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had absolutely no interest in anyone's business but her own. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, the same kitchen he'd been standing in 6 hours ago when the screen had gone dark and he'd heard everything. It looked exactly the same. He felt like a completely different person. He went to bed, did not sleep for approximately 90 minutes, fell asleep at some point before 5, and woke at 6:40 to the sound of Maya in the hallway announcing to nobody in particular that Gerald had lost an eye in the night, and this was an emergency. This was how the morning after everything began. "His eye was already loose," Logan said from under the pillow. "I told you it was loose." "You said it was fine." Maya appeared in the doorway in dinosaur pajamas, holding Gerald at arm's length with the expression of someone presenting evidence. "You said it was fine, and now it is not fine, Dad." He lifted the pillow off his face and looked at his daughter and at the one-eyed stuffed elephant and at the gray morning light coming through the curtains, and felt, despite everything, the 3 hours of sleep, the specific disorientation of a night that had rearranged something fundamental, an uncomplicated affection for the smallness of this crisis. "Bring him here," he said. Maya crossed the room with great solemnity and deposited Gerald on the bed beside him. The missing eye had not been lost so much as dangled, a button hanging by a single thread, which was a significantly more manageable problem than Maya's presentation had suggested. Logan held the elephant up, examined the situation, and determined that it required a needle and thread and about 3 minutes of work. "Can you fix him?" Maya asked. "Yeah, after breakfast." "What if he's scared?" "He's not scared. He's an elephant. He's very brave." Maya considered this. Climbed onto the bed in the sideways, sprawling way she had that left Logan approximately 8 inches of mattress, looked at the ceiling. "Dad." "Are you going to call Victoria today?" He turned his head to look at her, 6 years old and already possessed of some quality that made you feel slightly seen through. "Why do you ask?" "Because you always call her," Maya said simply, "and you look the way you look when you're thinking about stuff." "What way is that?" She scrunched up her nose. "Like when you're trying to figure out if the leftovers are still good." He laughed. He couldn't help it. "Yes," he said, "I'll probably call Victoria today." "Good." Maya seemed satisfied. "She always knows the right thing." She slid off the bed and padded back toward the hallway. "I'm having cereal," she announced to the house. "The good kind. Don't tell me no." He lay there another 30 seconds. Then he got up. The thing about being a single parent is that feelings, however large, do not pause the operational requirements of a small human being. Maya needed breakfast and a lost elephant eye sewn back on and her backpack found. It was, inevitably, in the bathroom, which was a location it had no business being in. And the whole morning machinery of getting a 6-year-old to school by 8:15 ran regardless of what had happened the night before, or how much sleep you'd gotten, or the fact that your internal landscape had quietly, significantly shifted. He made eggs because he'd forgotten to buy cereal. Maya informed him this was not what she'd said. He told her he'd buy cereal this weekend. She ate the eggs under formal protest and then ate a second helping without acknowledging the contradiction. He dropped her at school. Hugged her in the car because she still allowed this, though he knew the window was narrowing. Watched her run toward the entrance with her backpack bouncing and her ponytail coming half loose in the way it always did within 11 minutes of being fixed. And felt the familiar daily specific love of it. This small person he was responsible for, who named elephants Gerald and left notes on his pillow and issued pronouncements at 6:40 in the morning with the full authority of someone who expected to be taken seriously. He drove to work. He was a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm downtown that did mostly commercial projects, office buildings, renovations, a recent hospital expansion that had taken up a significant portion of the last 18 months. His desk was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled faintly of coffee and dry erase markers. He had a window that looked at another building. He was good at his job and modestly underpaid for it, and had been meaning to address that for about 8 months. He sat at his desk at 8:50 and opened his email and read the same paragraph 3 times without retaining any of it. His phone was face down on the desk. He had not looked at it since dropping Maya off. He was aware of this in the way you're aware of something you're deliberately not doing. He turned it over. No message from Victoria. This was not, in itself, unusual. She had morning meetings that started at 7. She was, by any measure, a busier person than he was on the most straightforward day. The absence of a message meant nothing except the absence of a message. He turned the phone back over, tried the email again. By 10 o'clock, he had accomplished approximately 40 minutes of actual work and drunk 2 cups of coffee that he didn't taste. His colleague James, who sat 2 desks away and possessed the specific gift of not noticing things unless directly addressed, asked him something about load calculations on the hospital project, and Logan answered correctly on autopilot, and James seemed satisfied and wandered away. At 10:17, his phone buzzed. Victoria. Are you at work? He looked at this message for what was probably an unreasonable amount of time. Logan. Yeah, you? Victoria. Board call in 8 minutes. I have 17 unread emails about Q3. Marcus sent me a follow-up at 6:45 this morning. Logan. Marcus? Victoria. The man has the emotional regulation of a golden retriever, but less charm. Logan. Are you okay? A pause. Longer than her usual. Victoria. I don't know yet. Are you? He set the phone down, picked it up again. Logan. I don't know yet either. I think that's fair. Victoria. Last night was... The message cut off. He watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice. Then, Victoria. Real. It was real. I just want you to know that. Logan. I know. Victoria. Okay, I have to take this call. Logan. Go. Victoria. Logan. Logan. Yeah. Victoria. Nothing. I'll call you later. He set the phone face up this time, went back to his email, read the same paragraph again, and this time it went in. The day moved forward the way days do, with complete indifference to the internal weather of the people moving through them. There were meetings, there were calculations. James brought back sandwiches from the deli around the corner, and Logan ate his without tasting it particularly, and this was apparently normal enough that no one noticed anything. The hospital project had a minor complication involving a contractor's revised load spec, which Logan spent 40 minutes working through, and which required 2 phone calls and an email chain that somehow ended up including 6 people who probably didn't need to be involved. At 4:30, he called her. She picked up on the first ring. Hi, she said. Hi. A moment. Not awkward exactly, just present. The both of them adjusting to the slightly altered frequency of this, whatever this was. How was the board call about? He asked. Expensive. Marcus wants to expand the hardware division into 3 new markets simultaneously, which is either visionary or a disaster depending on which analyst you ask. I asked 2. They disagreed. What do you think? I think he's right about one of the markets and wrong about the other 2, and I'm going to have to spend the next 2 weeks convincing him of this in a way that doesn't make him feel like he's being managed. She paused. How was your day? I accidentally scheduled a meeting I didn't need to schedule and had to unschedule it. Classic. Classic, he agreed. A beat. Victoria. I know. We should... I know. Her voice was careful. He recognized the cadence of it. This was the voice she used when she was thinking something through while also saying something else, running 2 tracks simultaneously. Can we... I don't want to do this on the phone. Can we... Tonight? Yes. Can you do dinner? Your place. I'll bring food. Yeah. He thought of Maya. Maya has a thing at 6. She has to show me a cloud presentation. It cannot be skipped under any circumstances. She has made this extremely clear. I wouldn't dream of skipping the cloud presentation. There was something in her voice that was warm and also slightly careful in a way that made his chest do something. 7, 7:30? 7's good. Okay. A pause. Logan? Yeah. She stopped. He could hear her breathing, the particular silence of someone choosing words. I've been thinking about it all day and I'm still... Another stop. I don't have a clean sentence for what I want to say. I'll see you tonight. See you tonight, he said. He hung up and sat for a moment in the parking garage where he'd taken the call, his car idling, the fluorescent lights of the structure doing their usual depressing work on every surface around him, and thought about the fact that Victoria Sterling, who had given perfectly constructed speeches before rooms full of investors without a note, who had navigated hostile boards and hostile press and hostile relatives with language so precise it was basically engineering, had just told him she didn't have a clean sentence. He thought that might be the most she'd ever revealed to him. He drove to pick up Maya. Maya's cloud presentation turned out to be less of a presentation and more of a series of drawings taped together with an alarming amount of packing tape, depicting various cloud formations with labels that were phonetically creative. Cumulus was spelled 4 different ways across the pages. There was a cloud labeled the Big Fluffy Dad one, with a drawing of Logan's face in it, which he decided to be flattered by. Maya presented this while standing on the couch for reasons of visibility, using a ruler as a pointer, with the seriousness of someone delivering a TED Talk. "What's this one?" he asked, pointing to what appeared to be an angry cloud. "That's a storm cloud. It's mad about something." "What is it mad about?" Maya considered. Probably someone didn't listen to it. Right. She rolled the presentation back up and jumped off the couch and said she was going to draw more clouds after dinner, possibly also some thunder. Logan told her that sounded excellent. She disappeared into her room and he heard the sound of markers being deployed. He cleaned the kitchen. He'd cleaned it already that morning, but cleaning it again gave him something to do with his hands. At 7:03, the buzzer sounded. Victoria came in with 2 bags of food from the Thai place he liked. The one on Finney Ridge that was technically a 15-minute drive from her building, and that she had obviously gone to specifically because it was his, and a small thing under her arm that turned out to be a sewing kit. He stared at it. "For the elephant," she said. "You mentioned the eye." He had, in fact, mentioned it briefly in a text that afternoon, a single throwaway line buried in a conversation about something else. She had remembered. She had gone out of her way to a Thai restaurant. She had stopped at a drugstore and bought a sewing kit. He stepped back to let her in. "Victoria!" Maya materialized from the hallway with the sudden speed particular to 6-year-olds when someone interesting arrives. "Gerald lost his eye." "I heard." Victoria held up the sewing kit. "I brought reinforcements." Maya's eyes went wide in the specific way they did when something exceeded expectations. "You know how to fix eyes?" "I know how to fix a lot of things." "Dad didn't know if you could fix it." "Dad," Victoria said, setting the bags on the counter and looking at Logan with something in her expression that was somewhere between affection and amusement, "underestimates me regularly." "That's true," Maya agreed with the cheerful disloyalty of a child who has no investment in adult dignity. He said the pipe would stop by itself, too. "The pipe," Victoria said. "It makes a dying sound," Maya said. "Every morning." "I have someone coming Friday," Logan said. "I scheduled someone for Thursday," Victoria said. He looked at her. "You said you'd been meaning to get it fixed for 8 months," she said. Not apologetic, not asking permission, just stating it. "So I called someone." He thought about several responses. Settled on, "What time Thursday?" 10. "Will you be home?" "I can work from home Thursday morning." "Okay." She was already unpacking the food. "Go get the elephant." Maya, who had been vibrating with barely contained energy during this exchange, took off at a dead sprint for her bedroom. Logan watched Victoria arrange containers on the counter, his counter, in his kitchen, with the easy familiarity of someone who had been here 100 times and knew where everything went, and felt the strange doubling of it, the same as always and completely different, both at once. "You didn't have to go to Finney Ridge," he said. "I was in the area." "You were not in the area." She glanced at him sideways. "I wanted to." Gerald appeared, delivered at high speed by Maya, and Victoria sat down at the kitchen table with the elephant and the sewing kit and examined the situation with the same focused attention she brought to quarterly reports. Logan set out plates. Maya climbed onto the chair across from Victoria and watched the repair operation with the intensity of a surgical observer. "Will it hurt him?" Maya asked. "Elephants are very stoic," Victoria said, threading the needle with neat precision. "They don't make a big fuss." "Dad makes a fuss when he gets splinters." "I make an appropriate amount of fuss," Logan said. "You say ow a lot. Splinters hurt." Victoria kept her eyes on the needle and said nothing, But something at the corner of her mouth was doing something. She worked quickly and neatly, the eye secured in under 4 minutes. The thread knotted and cut with a small pair of scissors from the kit that she somehow produced exactly when needed. She held Gerald up, both eyes present, symmetrical. Maya took him with the reverence of someone receiving something precious, examined him from all angles, then looked at Victoria with an expression of complete, unguarded trust that Logan felt somewhere in the region of his sternum. "Thank you," Maya said. "You're very welcome," Victoria said. They ate dinner, the three of them, at the kitchen table with the Thai food and the conversation that moved easily between Maya's cloud theories and a strange occurrence at Victoria's office, involving a misdirected email and 40 people who had no business receiving it, and Logan's contractor complication from work, which Maya listened to with great seriousness, even though she did not understand any of it. This was how dinner always went when Victoria came, had always gone. The three of them finding some comfortable orbit together, Maya including Victoria in everything with the natural ease of a child who had grown up with her presence as a constant. After dinner, Maya was bathed and put to bed with Gerald restored to his proper state. She demanded that Victoria come say goodnight, which was not unusual, and Victoria sat on the edge of the bed while Maya explained the cloud presentation from memory, unprompted, in full. Victoria listened to all of it, asked 2 questions. Maya answered them with authority. The expedition wound down into the particular heaviness of a tired 6-year-old, and by the time Logan came back through the door to check, Maya was 90% asleep. They went to the living room. This was the conversation they had been orienting toward all day. All the practical warmth of the evening having been, in some way, a way of moving slowly toward it. Logan sat on the couch. Victoria sat in the armchair across from him, legs tucked up, mug of tea he'd made warming both her hands. The lamp on the side table made the room feel small and close in a way that the fluorescent daylight never did. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. A silence that was not uncomfortable, but was significant. "I want to say something, and I need you to not interrupt," Victoria said. "Okay." She looked at the mug for a moment, then at him. "I have spent 6 years being very careful about all of it, because losing your friendship was the thing I was most afraid of in the world, and it seemed like the only way not to lose it was to manage myself. Keep everything at exactly the right level." She paused. "Which is a very boardroom way to approach something that was never actually a boardroom problem." He waited. "Last night, you showing up like that, what you said." She stopped, looked away briefly, the way she did when something was closer to the surface than she wanted. "I need you to understand that I'm not—" Another stop. "I don't bounce back from things easily. I'm not casual about this. Whatever we're talking about doing here, I'm not going to be casual about it. Which means if it doesn't work out, Victoria, I need to say this. Okay? If it doesn't work out, it is going to be not recoverable. For me, I want you to know that. I'm not saying that to pressure you. I'm saying it because you deserve to know what this actually is for me before you decide anything." Logan looked at her. The woman who had, for 6 years, managed everything, who had held herself at exactly the right distance and said exactly the right things, and kept the feeling contained because she'd decided the friendship was worth more than the risk. "When Maya was 3, he said, she had a nightmare that there was a bear in the house. Do you remember this?" Victoria looked at him slightly sideways. "This is an unexpected direction. You were on the phone with me for an hour and 40 minutes. It was 2 in the morning. She kept getting up, and you made up a whole story about a bear who was lost and looking for his family and ended up somewhere warm and safe. You did the voices." She fell asleep in the middle of it. "I remember," Victoria said quietly. "I thought about it for a week afterward. Not in a—" He stopped, tried to find it. "I just kept thinking, who does that? Who stays on the phone for an hour and 40 minutes at 2 in the morning to talk a 3-year-old out of a nightmare? Who does that and then just says goodnight and hangs up and doesn't make anything of it?" She was very still. "Someone who's already in it," he said, "already part of it. Not as a favor, not as a gesture. Just because that's what you are to us." He paused. To me. She looked at him for a long time. I'm not asking you to not be scared, he said. I'm scared too. I'm a 32-year-old single dad with a daughter who adopts imaginary wall cats and a pipe that sounds like someone dying, and I have been aggressively bad at relationships for my entire adult life, and I don't entirely know how to do this. He spread his hands slightly. But I showed up at midnight in the rain, and you let me in, and I think that tells us something. Victoria set her mug down. She didn't say anything for a moment. I need us to go slowly, she said finally. She shook her head slightly. Not because I just need it to be real. I need it to build from something real, not just from last night, which was, slow is fine, he said. Slow is actually ideal. I have a child, Victoria. My life is structurally incompatible with anything that moves fast. Something shifted in her face, a small release of something she'd been holding. Okay, she said. Okay. So, she picked up the mug again, looked at him steadily. What does slow look like? I think it looks like this, he said. Dinner, the elephant, your person fixing my pipe on Thursday. It looks like what we've already been doing, mostly, except now we know what it is. She thought about this. I can do that, she said. I know you can. Don't sound smug. I'm not being smug. I'm being accurate. She gave him a long look that was somewhere between exasperation and something warmer. You're occasionally very annoying, she said. You've known this for 6 years. I have, she agreed. Inexplicably, it has not been a deal breaker. They stayed until almost 11. They did not solve everything. Nobody solves everything in a single kitchen table conversation after 6 years of a different kind of history. There were things still to figure out. What it looked like publicly, given who Victoria was and what that meant. What it meant for Maya, who was young and adaptive but still a person whose world would be affected by whatever shifted in it. What it meant for the friendship they'd built, which was not going to disappear, but was going to have to find a new shape. None of that was resolved by 11 o'clock on a Wednesday in Logan's living room. But none of it needed to be yet. What there was instead was this. Two people who had known each other for 6 years sitting with the particular comfort of people who know they don't have to perform anything, and finding that the thing they had, the actual existing thing, with all its history and texture and the one-eyed elephant and the 2 a.m. phone calls and the bear story and 6 years of first rings, was still there. It hadn't broken. It had bent and found a new shape. And the new shape was not worse. Victoria left at 11:10. At the door, she paused. Not dramatically, just for a moment. Good night, Logan, she said. Good night. He paused. Hey. She looked at him. Thank you for the sewing kit. Something crossed her face that was not the boardroom smile and not the careful managed expression and not the specific warmth she kept at exactly the right level. Something more honest than any of those. Something that had been behind all of them for 6 years. Any time, she said. She walked to her car in the cold November dark, and he stood in the doorway until the taillights disappeared around the corner. The street was quiet. The bad pipe in the wall, now on a schedule, now being addressed, now no longer entirely his problem to solve alone, made its usual unhappy sound as the heat kicked on. He locked the door. He checked on Maya. Still asleep. Gerald restored and tucked back in place. The cloud drawing stacked neatly on the desk, Cumulus spelled 4 different ways. He stood in the hallway of his small house in Fremont and thought about the fact that something that had been impossible for 6 years had, in the span of 24 hours, quietly rearranged itself into something that might, with enough care and enough time and enough dinners and enough elephant repairs, become the realest thing either of them had. He went to bed. This time he slept. Slow, it turned out. Looked like a Saturday morning in December with Maya between them on the couch watching a nature documentary about elephants, which Maya had selected specifically and with great deliberateness because of Gerald, and which none of them were entirely watching because Maya kept interrupting to ask questions that the documentary could not answer fast enough to satisfy her. Do elephants have best friends? She asked. Yes, actually, Victoria said. They form very close bonds. They remember each other for years. Even when they're far away? Especially then. Maya considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. Then she repositioned herself so that she was leaning against Victoria's arm instead of the couch cushion, the way she did with people she had decided were safe, the way she'd done with Logan's sister the first time they met, and with Carol from the first week. And Logan, watching from the other end of the couch with his coffee going cold on the armrest, felt something settle in his chest that he didn't try to name. This was 3 weeks after the midnight drive. 3 weeks of slow, which had looked exactly as he'd told her it would, mostly like what they'd been doing. Dinner on Wednesdays, phone calls that ran long, a Sunday where she'd come along to Maya's school's winter fair and spent 45 minutes at the craft table making something that was supposed to be a reindeer and that Maya generously described as a dog. The contractor had come on Thursday as scheduled and fixed the pipe, and the house had been quietly different since, less haunted sounding in the mornings, which Logan hadn't realized how much he'd adjusted to until it stopped. The difference from before was the thing underneath. The knowledge that sat below all of it now, like a new floor you hadn't known was there. Everything was the same, and everything had a different weight. They had not told anyone. This was Victoria's ask, and he'd understood it. Her life was public in a way his wasn't. Her name showed up in business press, in the Seattle social pages, occasionally in national coverage when Sterling Technologies did something worth covering. A relationship for her was not a private thing by default. It became a story. It became a thing that people had opinions about and angles on. She needed time before any of that started. Time for it to be real to them before it became a narrative for everyone else. So they didn't tell anyone, which meant Logan was having a genuinely difficult time not telling James at work, who had started noticing that Logan seemed different in a way he couldn't articulate, and who had said, twice now, in the way of a man who is trying very hard not to pry, "You seem, I don't know, better. Did you change your diet?" Logan had told him he was sleeping more. James had accepted this and moved on. On Victoria's end, the situation was more complicated because Claire already knew. Claire had been in the hallway. Claire had heard every word. And Claire, to her considerable credit, had said absolutely nothing about it at work since, had shown up on Thursday morning with the same organized efficiency, had managed the schedule and the board communications and the Marcus situation, and had given Victoria the professional courtesy of pretending the conversation had never happened. Until the second Friday in December, when she set a coffee on Victoria's desk, turned to leave, and then turned back. "Can I say one thing?" Claire asked. Victoria looked up from the report she was reading. "You're going to say it whether I say yes or not." "He came at midnight," Claire said. "In the rain, after 6 years." She picked up the folder she'd come in to deliver. "I'm just noting that." "Noted," Victoria said. "Okay." Claire moved toward the door. "Claire," she stopped. "Thank you," Victoria said, "for all of it. For not... You don't have to thank me." Claire's voice was matter-of-fact, kind, in the way of someone who means it without needing to make a production of it. "Just be careful with it, both of you." She paused. "He seems like someone worth being careful with." Victoria looked at the report for a long moment after Claire left. Then she picked up her phone and sent Logan a text that said only, "How's your day?" He replied 40 seconds later, "The concrete supplier is being difficult. How's yours?" Marcus sent 3 emails before 9. Classic Marcus. I may send him a gift basket. Inside the gift basket, resignation. Victoria. "I'm kidding. Mostly." Mostly? The basket was already half assembled in my head. He sent back a laughing emoji, which was not a thing he did often, which meant he was actually laughing, which was a distinction she had learned to read. She put the phone face down and went back to the report, and the feeling that sat under her ribs like something warming up was not the managed, contained warmth she'd spent 6 years carefully maintaining. It was something else, something that had more room to breathe now. She was not entirely used to that yet. The thing about having kept a feeling contained for 6 years is that when you let it out, it doesn't just sit politely where you put it. It expands. It finds corners you didn't know you'd been keeping closed. She would be in a board meeting and something would happen. Marcus would say something obtuse, or the numbers would come up particularly well, or someone would make a joke that landed. And she would think, I want to tell Logan this, which was not new. She'd been thinking that for years. What was new was the layer under it. The fact that when she told him, something had changed in the telling. The fact that he was not just her friend who she happened to love from a careful, managed distance, but her. Something she didn't have a clean word for yet. Something that was still becoming. She was going slowly. She was being careful. She was doing the things she'd said she needed to do. She was also, increasingly, finding that slow was harder than she'd expected it to be when the thing you were going slowly toward was someone you had already wanted for 6 years. The Saturday on the couch ended with Maya asleep between them. An event that had not been planned and that happened gradually. The way children fall asleep with a slow heaviness that moved through her until she was completely out. Gerald, under her arm, head tipped sideways against Victoria's shoulder. The documentary was still running. An elephant family on a dry savanna doing something quietly remarkable. Logan looked across at Victoria. She looked back at him. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. The moment existed in the way some moments do, complete in itself, not requiring anything added to it. Then Maya shifted in her sleep and made a small sound, and the elephant on the television found its family, and Logan got up quietly to get a blanket from the hall closet because the room had gotten cold. This was what slow looked like. And it was fine. It was more than fine. It was also the last genuinely uncomplicated weekend for a while. The call came on a Monday. Victoria was in her car, in the parking structure under the office building, about to go up for a 9 o'clock meeting, when her phone rang with the specific ring she'd assigned to her parents' house. An old landline number her mother still insisted on maintaining because she did not trust cellular networks, which was an irony that was not lost on anyone in a family that had made a significant portion of its fortune in telecommunications. She picked up expecting her mother. She got her father's assistant, a man named Holt, who had worked for Richard Sterling for 23 years and who had, in Victoria's experience, 2 modes, professional and extremely professional. He was using the second one. "Ms. Sterling, your father asked me to reach you directly. He'd like to arrange a call this afternoon if you're available." Her father did not arrange calls through Holt. Her father called himself at inconvenient hours without warning. The fact that he had dispatched Holt meant something had been deliberated over. Something was being managed. "Is he all right?" she asked, and the question came out with a directness that surprised even her. Not the CEO asking about a shareholder's health, but a daughter asking about her father. A half-second pause. "He's asked me to let him speak to you directly about the details. He's available at 2 or 4. 2, she said. She sat in the parking structure for a moment after she hung up. Then she went upstairs. She got through the 9 o'clock meeting. She got through the 10:30 call with the legal team about a contract dispute in the Pacific Northwest Division. She got through a working lunch that was technically lunch only because food was present and everyone was eating, which was the minimum qualifying criteria. At 1:50, she closed her office door and sat at her desk. And at 2 o'clock exactly, her father called. Richard Sterling was 71 years old and had the voice of a man who had spent 5 decades in rooms where his opinion was the one that mattered. It was a voice that had never entirely lost its authority, even when, especially when, it was trying to sound casual. Victoria. He used her full name the way he always did. He had called her Vic exactly twice in her life, both times under circumstances significant enough that she remembered them specifically. Dad? She kept her voice even. What's going on? A pause. The particular pause of someone organizing something. I had some test results last week. I've been having some things checked out, some symptoms. What kind of symptoms? The cardiac kind. He said it with the flat practicality of a man reporting a quarterly shortfall. The doctors have been very thorough, very thorough. They're good people. Another pause. The short version is that I'm going to need some time, some significant time, away from operational demands. Victoria was very still. How significant, she said. 12 months, possibly longer. It depends on the treatment and There are some decisions to be made about the treatment. He cleared his throat. I've been talking to the board, the family trust. There are some concerns about the East Coast divisions particularly. You know the Hartford situation has been ongoing, and the Brennan Group restructure hasn't been. It needs someone there, Victoria. Someone who understands what those assets actually are, not just on paper. You want me to relocate, she said. I want the company to be in good hands while I'm not able to Dad. A silence. Are you... How serious is this? She heard her own voice doing the thing it did when she was holding something in. Flatter than usual, more precise. Not the company. You. How serious? Another pause. Longer. The doctors are optimistic, he said, with treatment. The numbers are... They're not... There's reason to be optimistic. A beat. But I need to step back, Victoria. I need to step back, and I need to know it's handled. I need to know the East Coast is handled. I can't... He stopped, and for just a moment, underneath the practiced authority and the careful corporate language, she heard something else, something older and more tired. I need to not be thinking about Hartford while I understand, she said. I'm not asking you to... I understand, Dad. I need to think about the logistics. She paused. When? The board would like someone in place by February. February was 8 weeks away. Let me look at the Hartford situation, she said. I'll call you tomorrow. Victoria, get some rest, she said. I mean it. Get some rest and let me work. She hung up. She sat at her desk for approximately 90 seconds. Her window looked at another building, as it always did. The same building, the same gray December sky above it, the same sounds of the office on the other side of her closed door. Then she picked up her phone and called Logan. He picked up on the third ring, which meant he was at his desk and had had to pull himself out of something, which was the only time it wasn't the first ring. Hey, he said, I have about... Can you talk? A pause. Something in her voice had reached him through one word. She heard him move. The sound of a door, then quiet. What happened? He said. Not a question. She told him. Flat and quick, the facts first, the way she'd been taught. Her father's health. The cardiac situation, the request. Hartford, February. When she finished, there was a silence. Victoria, he said, I'm not... She stopped. I'm not falling apart. I'm telling you because I needed to tell someone, and you're... She stopped again. I just needed to tell you. I know. His voice was quiet. I know. I'm here. He sounded tired, she said. And this was the thing she hadn't been able to say to her father and couldn't have said to Holt or the board or anyone in the office. He's not a tired person. He's never sounded like that. That's scary, Logan said simply. Yes. She pressed her fingers against her desk. It is. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer the things people offered when they were trying to be helpful, but were mostly trying to resolve their own discomfort with someone else's pain. The statistics, the modern medicine is remarkable. The things will work out. He just stayed on the line. What do you need right now? He asked after a moment. I don't know. True. Honest. She almost never said that. I don't know yet. Okay. That's okay. A pause. I'm going to pick up Maya at 3:15. Do you want to come? We can go to that terrible coffee place on Greenwood she likes. The one that makes everything taste like cinnamon, even when you don't order cinnamon. She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. I have a 4 o'clock call, she said. After? After, she said. Yeah, after. She got through the 4 o'clock call. She got through a reply to 2 board members who had emailed about the Hartford situation. Clearly, her father had already briefed certain people, which was both efficient and slightly infuriating in the way that her father's efficiency sometimes was, the way that moved faster than the feelings it was trying to outpace. She got through closing up the office at 5:30 and telling Claire she was leaving, which she did not always do. Claire said, He called, didn't he? Victoria stopped. The Hartford situation is going to need some attention in the next few weeks. I'll brief you tomorrow. It wasn't an answer. Claire had the grace not to push. The coffee place on Greenwood was small and overly warm and did in fact make everything taste like cinnamon, up to and including a black coffee that Logan had ordered hopefully and regarded with visible disappointment. Maya had a hot chocolate that was approximately 60% whipped cream and sat across from both of them at a small round table with the absolute contentment of someone whose needs were being entirely met by the current situation. Victoria wrapped both hands around her cup. The warmth of it was grounding in a way that was less about the coffee and more about having something to hold. "My dad is sick," she said. She hadn't planned to say it in front of Maya, but Maya was looking at her with those particular 6-year-old eyes that missed very little, and lying, even by omission, to a child who was looking at you directly felt wrong. Maya set down her hot chocolate. "Like a cold sick or a serious sick?" Victoria looked at her. "A serious sick. Is he going to get better?" "The doctors think so, yes." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, "My grandma got a serious sick before. She had to go to the hospital a lot. And then she got better, and then she died anyway." She said it with the matter-of-fact sadness of a child who has already had to learn this particular thing about the world and has processed it into a fact rather than a wound, which is what children do. "I was 4. I don't really remember it very much." Logan was very still across the table. "I remember she smelled like lavender," Maya added, "and she let me put stickers on everything." Victoria looked at this child, this specific child who had sat on her shoulder and fallen asleep and asked her about elephant friendships and accepted her without audition, and felt something that was grief and tenderness in the same moment, the way feelings sometimes arrive together without asking permission. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," Victoria said. She was. Maya picked up her hot chocolate, looked at Victoria steadily. "Your dad is going to be okay, probably. The doctors are usually pretty good." "Yeah," Victoria said. "Probably." "And if he's not okay," Maya said, with the brutal, pragmatic kindness that only children could deliver, "then you'll be sad for a while. But you won't be sad forever. That's what Dad told me." Logan looked at his terrible cinnamon coffee and said nothing. "That's good advice," Victoria said. "Dad gives good advice mostly." Maya considered. "Except about pipes." The corner of Logan's mouth moved. They stayed until the coffee place closed at 7, which was embarrassingly early for a coffee place, but seemed to be a choice they'd made and committed to. Maya had a second hot chocolate, which Logan allowed under the general principle that some days warranted it. Victoria talked to them about something other than her father, about the reindeer dog craft project, which Maya had displayed at school to what she described as mixed reviews, and about Gerald's ongoing excellent health, and about a book Maya was reading that was, according to Maya, a little sad in the middle, but okay at the end. "Most good things are," Victoria said. Maya looked up at her. "Is that true?" "I think so." Maya appeared to file this away. "Okay," she said, as though it were a fact now, settled and confirmed, and went back to the book. They drove back in Logan's car. Maya fell asleep in the back seat inside of 10 minutes, the book open on her lap, head against the window. The city moved past outside. Logan drove and didn't push anything, and Victoria sat in the passenger seat and looked at the lights, and did not feel like the CEO of anything. "She's going to be okay," Logan said quietly, meaning his daughter, meaning the child asleep in the back seat, who had offered her dead grandmother and 6-year-old grief as comfort, and meant every word of it. "I know," Victoria said. "She's extraordinary." "She's 6. She just says things." "That's what makes her extraordinary." He glanced at her sideways, then back at the road. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "About Hartford. About February." He didn't need to say it. "I don't know yet." She watched a traffic light change. "I need to look at the actual situation before I decide anything. The divisions, what they actually need, whether relocation is—" She paused. "Whether that's the only option or just the easiest one." "Do you want help looking at it?" She glanced at him. "You're a structural engineer." "I'm a person who's good at looking at problems," he said. "I solve load-bearing issues for a living. I can look at your family's East Coast division situation and tell you if the structure holds." She was quiet for a moment. The thing he was offering was not complicated analysis. It was company. It was someone to sit with while she worked through something hard, which was what they had always given each other, and which, she was learning, had a different texture now. More honest, more openly needed. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." He nodded. They drove the rest of the way in a silence that was not empty. He carried Maya in from the car. She woke up halfway up the front path, registered that she was being carried, and went immediately back to sleep in the specific way of a child who knows they're safe. Victoria held the door. Logan got Maya settled, changed into pajamas with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this approximately 2,000 times. Gerald installed, light off. He came back to the kitchen where Victoria was making tea she hadn't asked about making, finding the mugs without being told where they were, filling the kettle from the tap. "You know where everything is," he said. "I've been in this kitchen 100 times." "I know, it's not a complaint." She handed him a mug, kept one for herself. They sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where everything had shifted 3 weeks ago, and she pulled out her phone and opened the email thread from her father's assistant, the Hartford situation, the East Coast divisions, the numbers. "Okay," she said. "Tell me what you see." He leaned over and looked at the figures. He asked questions that were not the questions a financial person would ask. He asked about what was actually breaking, what the weight was sitting on, whether the whole structure was compromised or just certain load-bearing parts. She answered. He listened in the particular way he had, fully and without interrupting. He asked more questions. "The problem isn't Hartford specifically," he said after a while. "No. The problem is that nobody's been watching the weight distribution for about 3 years. The Hartford thing is a symptom." "Yes." "So moving someone to Hartford doesn't fix it. It patches one part while the rest keeps going." "That's what I think," she said. "But that's not what my father thinks. Or the board. They want someone visible, on the ground, managing the optics as much as the actual... And you moving to Hartford manages the optics." "Yes." She set down her mug. "I'm the name. I'm the thing that signals to everyone involved that this is being taken seriously. But you can see the actual problem from here." "Largely, yes." She paused. "Largely, there's some of it that needs direct access, some conversations that need to happen in rooms." She looked at the numbers. "But the idea that I need to be there full time is, I think it's the board's comfort, more than the actual requirement." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "So what would it actually take? Not what the board wants, what would it actually take?" She looked at him. "Humor me," he said. She thought about it, really thought about it, not from the angle of what was expected or what her father had asked for, or what would look right to the family trust. What would it actually take to stabilize the East Coast situation, rebuild the right structure, get Hartford functional? What specifically was required and what was ceremony? She started talking. He listened and occasionally asked questions, and she talked for almost an hour, out loud, working through it in real time. And somewhere in the middle of it, she realized that she was not just talking to someone who was with her. She was thinking more clearly than she'd been able to since the parking structure this morning, because thinking at someone who was actually listening was different from thinking alone. At some point, she stopped and looked at him. "You're not just being kind," she said. "No," he agreed. "You actually think I can solve this without..." "I think you already know how to solve it," he said. "You've been talking through the solution for 40 minutes. You just haven't said the last part out loud yet." She looked at her notes, a mess of figures and half sentences on her phone. "The last part is the part the board won't like." "Is the board wrong?" She was quiet. "Are they wrong about what it takes?" he said. "Or are they wrong about who needs to do it from where?" "The second one," she said. "Then that's what you tell them." "It's not that simple." "I know it's not that simple." He said it without irritation. "I'm saying that's the direction." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're very calm," she said. "One of us needs to be." "I'm calm." "You've been holding that mug like it owes you money for the last 20 minutes. She looked down at her hand, deliberately relaxed it. He watched her do this with the expression of someone who is not going to say anything about it, which was almost worse. "My father sounded tired," she said again. Back to the thing underneath all the structural analysis. The thing she kept returning to. I know. I'm not. She pressed her lips together briefly. I'm not good at the parts I can't solve. Nobody is. I'm particularly not good at them. I know that too. He said it without judgment. But you don't have to be good at it right now. You just have to sit with it. He paused. And you're not sitting with it alone. She looked at him. The ordinary kitchen, the late hour, the space between where they were and where they'd started that was both large and somehow not as large as it had felt 3 weeks ago. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. She left at 10:30. The drive back to Belltown was 20 minutes at this hour, the city quieter than it was by day, and she drove it with the particular kind of tiredness that wasn't about sleep, the tiredness of a day that had held too many things and required her to hold them all upright. She got home, poured a glass of water, stood at the window, her phone lit up. Logan. You okay? She looked at it for a moment. Victoria, get in there. Logan. Good. Sleep. Victoria. I know. Logan. I mean it. Actually, sleep. Victoria. You said that before. Logan. It was true before. She set the phone down, looked at the city below. The same rain-soaked Seattle she'd looked at the night everything changed. The same lights and the same reflections and the same reaching dark water in the distance. She went to bed. She slept better than she had any right to. The Hartford situation remained. Her father's health remained. The board and the family trust and all the weight of a company that carried her name remained. None of that had been resolved by one late-night kitchen conversation and a man who listened and a cup of tea gone cold. But the shape of it was different in the morning, slightly less like a wall and slightly more like a problem, which was the only version of a difficult thing that she knew how to move through. She called Claire at 7:15. Get me a full breakdown of the Hartford division, she said. Revenue, personnel, operational structure, the works. I want to see what we're actually dealing with. By when? Wednesday. Done. A pause. Do you want me to schedule the board call? Not yet. Victoria pulled up her calendar. Give me until end of week to look at it first. Of course. Claire. Yes? You were right, Victoria said. He is worth being careful with. A brief pause on the other end. I know, Claire said simply, and hung up, and the day began. Claire delivered the Hartford breakdown on Wednesday morning, as promised, in a folder that was heavier than Victoria had expected. Not just in pages, but in what the pages contained. She read through it in her office with the door closed, twice, once fast and once slow. And by the end of the second pass, she had the particular feeling of someone who has suspected a thing and has now had that suspicion confirmed in writing with supporting documentation. The Hartford division was not simply struggling, it had been struggling in a specific patterned way for 31 months, bleeding slowly across 4 operational areas, while the people responsible for reporting upward had been reporting numbers that were technically accurate and contextually misleading. Not fraud. Nothing as clean as fraud. Just the particular kind of selective truth-telling that happens inside large organizations when the people closest to a problem are also the people whose careers depend on the problem not being visible. Victoria set down the folder and looked at the wall for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called her father. He answered on the second ring. Better than Holt. That was something. You read it, he said. How long have you known the numbers were being managed? A pause. The kind that meant he was deciding how much to say. I had suspicions. Dad. 8 months. Perhaps 9. I was building a case before I... He stopped. Before the health situation became what it became. I didn't want to move on Hartford while you were still trying not to acknowledge the health situation. Silence. That's not a criticism, she said. She meant it. I understand, but I need to know what I'm actually walking into. The personnel situation in Hartford is, he cleared his throat, delicate. Tell me about the delicate parts. He did. It took 40 minutes, and what emerged was a picture significantly more complicated than the folder had suggested. A division head named Carver, who had been with the company for 18 years and whose loyalty to Richard Sterling personally was not the same thing as his loyalty to the company's actual interests, and a board subcommittee that had been aware of certain performance issues and had chosen collectively to table them rather than surface them during a period when Richard was unwell. The Brennan Group restructure that her father had mentioned on the first call had not stalled due to market conditions. It had stalled because Carver had been running his own play with one of the Brennan Group's principals, a side negotiation that served his positioning and not the company's. By the time her father finished, Victoria had filled 4 pages of her legal pad in her cramped, left-leaning handwriting. "Why didn't you tell me this on the first call?" she asked. A silence that told her exactly why, because telling her meant making it real, meant admitting that something had gone wrong on his watch, meant acknowledging that the empire he'd built and handed to her had developed a crack he hadn't caught in time. "Dad, I know," he said quietly. "I know. I should have. It's fine." She said it before she'd entirely decided whether it was fine, but she said it because he sounded the way he'd sounded on that first call. Tired in a way that was not his usual tiredness, and because being right about this was less important than getting through it. "I have what I need now. I'll handle Carver." "Victoria." His voice shifted. Something in it that he didn't use often. "I built that company for you. All of it. Everything. I want you to know that I know, Dad. I wasn't always the most—" He stopped, started again. "Your mother says I was difficult. Mom's very diplomatic." A surprised sound that was almost a laugh. "Get some rest," Victoria said. "Let the doctors do their work. I'll call you Friday with a plan." She hung up and sat quietly for a moment. Outside her window, December had settled into the particular gray permanence that Seattle wore from November through March. Not dramatic, just consistent, the sky the color of old concrete, the light arriving at a low, flat angle that made everything look like late afternoon even at noon. She had until Friday to have a plan. She called Logan at lunch. "Carver," she said by way of opening. "Who's Carver?" She explained. He listened. She could hear him eating something at his desk, something that rustled, which meant chips, which he always denied buying and always had. "So the division head has been running his own agenda for how long?" Logan asked. "Best estimate, 2 years. While your father was watching. While my father was—" She paused. "My father trusted him. They've known each other a long time. It's harder to see it in someone you trust." "Yeah," Logan said, with a flatness that meant he was thinking about something else for a second, something personal, and then setting it aside. "Okay. So Hartford isn't just a numbers problem. Hartford is a personnel problem wearing a numbers problem as a coat. That's a very specific way to say it. I've been sitting with it for 4 hours. What are you going to do about Carver?" She looked at her legal pad. "What I need to decide first is whether I can do it from here or whether the board is right and I need to be there." She picked up the pen, put it down. "Carver is the kind of person who manages up, who performs competence for an audience, who is very good at conference calls and very bad at being watched directly. If I walk into Hartford in person, I can see what he actually is in about 48 hours. But walking into Hartford in person is what the board wants. And if I do it the way they want it, I become their solution to the problem, which means I lose the ability to define what the solution actually is." "So go on your terms," Logan said. "It's not that simple." "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." "Victoria." He said her name in the way he had, not impatient, not trying to close the conversation down, but grounding, bringing her back to something. "What do you actually want to do?" She looked at the window. "I want to go to Hartford for 2 weeks. I want to see Carver, see the operation, confirm what I think I know. Then I want to come back here and restructure the division remotely, with a new head in Hartford who I choose, with systems that don't require my physical presence to function." "That sounds like the plan." "The board wants a permanent presence." "The board wants the feeling of control," Logan said. "A permanent presence gives them that feeling. Doesn't mean it's the right fix." She was quiet. "You told me that yourself," he added. 3 nights ago. At your kitchen table." It was your kitchen table. Same point. She found unexpectedly that she was almost smiling. The specific Logan Hayes effect. Not making things better exactly, but making them more workable, more human scale. She'd experienced this for 6 years and had spent a significant portion of those years pretending it wasn't one of the things she loved most about him. "I need to tell the board before I go," she said. "Frame it correctly. When are you thinking of going?" "January, first or second week." A pause. "That's 3 weeks." "Yes." Another pause. Longer. She could feel him working through something. "How long would you be there?" 2 weeks, maybe 12 days if it goes well." "Okay." He said it in the way that meant it wasn't entirely okay, but he was working on it. "That's manageable." "Logan, it's fine," he said. 12 days. It's fine. We'll figure it out." "We." She noticed that. She was fairly sure he noticed that he'd said it too, because there was a brief second after it where neither of them acknowledged it and both of them heard it. "I haven't even confirmed I'm going yet," she said. "You're going," he said. "You just described a plan. You don't describe plans for things you're not going to do." She thought about arguing with this and concluded that he was right. "I'll call you tonight." "I'll be home. Maya has a spelling test tomorrow, and I promise to help her study, which will last approximately 9 minutes before she decides she already knows everything." She probably does. She does not. She spelled because as because 3 times last week with complete confidence. She's 6. She's very confident about being 6. Victoria hung up, and for the first time since Monday morning felt like the problem in front of her had edges she could work with. Not solved, not simple, but shapeable. She scheduled the board call for Thursday. The board call was not a disaster, but not comfortable either. There were 7 voting members of the Sterling Technologies board, and of those 7, 4 had strong opinions about Hartford, and 2 of those 4 had strong opinions that happened to be wrong. Victoria walked them through the Hartford situation as she understood it, including the Carver problem, which generated a significant reaction from a man named Elton Marsh, who had been on the board since before Victoria had taken over, and who had, she knew, considered Carver personally trustworthy, based on approximately 3 dinners over as many years. "That's a serious allegation," Marsh said. "It's an assessment based on 31 months of documented pattern," Victoria said. "The allegation will be formal once I've confirmed it in person." "You're going to Hartford yourself?" "For 2 weeks. Yes. The family trust position." "I'm aware of the family trust position." She kept her voice even. "I'm also the one who is going to be running this company for the next 30 to 40 years, Elton, and the decision about how we structure the East Coast leadership is not a 2-week fix dressed up as a permanent one. What Hartford needs is the right structure with the right person in it. I'm going to spend 2 weeks confirming what that is, and then I'm going to put it in place." "And your father agrees with this approach?" "You're welcome to call him." She let that sit for a moment. "But I'd remind the board that my father's primary concern right now is his health, and that one of the things that would help his health is knowing that this situation is being handled by someone he trusts. So I'd prefer we not add to his operational concerns unnecessarily." A silence. Marcus, who had been quiet for most of the call, said, "What's the timeline for the Carver resolution?" 90 days from my return." "That's aggressive." "It's realistic. I don't do timelines I can't hit." Another silence. The board had, over 3 years of working with Victoria, learned this to be true. She set timelines she kept. It was one of the things they counted on and occasionally found inconvenient. 2 weeks in Hartford," Marsh said, finally, "and you're back in Seattle." "And I'm back in Seattle, running the East Coast restructure remotely with a leadership team I've selected and systems designed not to require my physical presence at every decision point." She paused. "Which is, incidentally, what modern remote leadership infrastructure exists for. We're a technology company. We should be capable of demonstrating that technology works." The faintest sound on the line that might have been Marcus suppressing something. The board approved the plan with 4 in favor, 2 abstaining, and Marsh, who did not vote against it but made clear by the quality of his silence that he had reservations he intended to return to later. Victoria knew Marsh. His reservations were real, and some of them were worth taking seriously, and she would deal with them when they resurfaced, which they would. She called her father that evening. "The board call went well," she said. "I heard." A pause that meant he'd already spoken to someone, probably Marsh. "You told them about Carver." "It needed to be on the record." "Marsh is upset." "Marsh will manage." Her father was quiet for a moment. "You sound like me," he said. "When I was younger, when I was still—" "Don't." She said it gently. "Don't talk about yourself in the past tense." A silence. "The doctors were pleased with Tuesday's results," he said, slightly stilted, the way he said things that were about his health, as though he was reading from a report about someone else. "The treatment protocol is, they think it's working. Early signs." "That's good, Dad." "Yes." A pause. "Your mother cried. She doesn't—" He stopped. "She doesn't cry easily." Victoria thought of her mother, Margaret Sterling, 70 years old, as composed as the house she'd maintained for 4 decades, who had sat through 30 years of boardroom politics and family trust negotiations and public scrutiny without visibly faltering. "Tell her I'm coming for Christmas. I'll call her this week." "She'd like that." Another pause. "Victoria, I know the company has always been—" He stopped, started differently. "I'm proud of you. I want to say that plainly. I'm proud of what you've built, not what I built. What you've built. They're different things, and I want you to know I know the difference." She sat with this for a moment. Her father was not a man who said things like this unprompted. He was a man who expressed pride through delegation and opportunity and the specific gesture of trusting someone with something important. He had said it plainly exactly twice before in her life. "Thank you," she said. And then, because it was true, and because she'd learned recently from someone that true things were worth saying plainly, "I love you, Dad." A silence on the other end that had a particular quality. "Get some rest," he said finally, which was not what she'd said but was, for Richard Sterling, the equivalent. She hung up. The week before Christmas arrived with the specific acceleration that December always brought, the city moving faster and brighter and more loudly than usual. Every store and restaurant suddenly draped in light, the whole social calendar thickening in the way it did when the year was ending, and everyone remembered simultaneously that they were supposed to have seen each other. Victoria's December calendar was, as always, substantial. There were donor events for the foundation she chaired and end-of-year executive dinners and 2 press appearances that had been scheduled since October. She got through all of it. She was good at all of it. What she was thinking about, underneath all of it, was Hartford and January and 12 days away from Seattle, and what 12 days away from Seattle now meant in a way it hadn't meant in previous years. She didn't tell anyone about Logan. Not publicly, not yet. But things had a way of becoming visible even when you weren't announcing them. And on the Thursday before Christmas, at an end-of-year dinner for one of the foundation's major donors, she was seated next to a woman named Petra Halverson, who was 60 years old and had known Victoria since she was 12, and who had the specific gift of seeing things that people would have preferred she not see. Petra waited until the main course and then said, calmly, "You seem different." Victoria picked up her wine glass. "Different how?" "Lighter." Petra tilted her head slightly. "Not lighter like less, lighter like something's been put down." She looked at Victoria with the directness that was either her best quality or her most alarming one depending on the situation. "Is there someone?" Victoria looked at her plate. "Victoria," Petra said. "It's new," Victoria said. "It's very new and I'm not—" "You don't have to tell me anything." Petra's voice was dry and kind in equal measure. "I'm just noting the obvious." "It's not obvious. To me it is. I've known you since you were in braces." She picked up her own wine. "Is he kind to you?" Victoria thought about a sewing kit, a terrible cinnamon coffee place, the way he'd stayed on the phone without trying to fix things she couldn't fix. "I'm here." "Yes," she said. "He is." "Good." Petra said it with finality, as though this were sufficient information and she required nothing further. "That's the only thing that matters in the end. The rest is details." It's considerably more complicated than it always is, Petra said. And then it isn't. That's how it works. Victoria thought about arguing with this and decided Petra would win, as Petra generally did. Christmas itself she spent at her parents' house in Medina. 2 days, which was the right amount. Her mother had decorated the house in the same way she decorated it every year, with a consistency that was either comforting or stubborn depending on your relationship to change, and her father was present but quieter than usual, moving more carefully, occasionally sitting in a way that suggested he was conserving something. She watched him across the Christmas dinner table and felt the whole complicated weight of him, who he was to the company, who he was to her, who he was when nobody was performing anything, which was a smaller and more human version of all the other things. On Christmas morning, she called Logan. He picked up immediately, which meant he'd been awake for a while, which meant Maya had been awake for a while. She found the presents at 5:45, he said, by way of greeting. His voice had the texture of someone who had gotten 4 hours of sleep and was choosing to find this funny. What happened to the hiding spot? She has defeated every hiding spot I have ever deployed. I don't know how. I think she has some kind of present sensing ability. Did she like the elephant? Victoria had found a stuffed elephant at a shop in Belltown in early December. Not a replacement for Gerald, very specifically a companion for Gerald, a distinction she'd considered important. She'd left it for Logan to wrap and include. She named him immediately. A pause. Geraldine. Victoria laughed. A real one. Of course she did. She's been explaining the family dynamics to both of them for 45 minutes. Gerald is apparently Geraldine's older brother. There's a whole structure. That tracks. It really does. She could hear Maya in the background, the specific cadence of a child narrating something to toys. How's your dad? Better than I expected, she said honestly. Quieter, but present. That's good. It is. She looked out the window of the room she'd grown up in. The same view, Medina in the winter, Lake Washington cold and flat in the distance. I'm glad I came. Of course you are. Don't be smug. I'm never smug. I'm accurate. A pause. Merry Christmas, Victoria. Merry Christmas, Logan. She stayed on the line for another few minutes, not saying much, just the comfortable sound of his household on Christmas morning. Maya's ongoing narration, the sound of coffee being made, the old house doing its old house sounds. Her mother appeared in the doorway of the room and raised her eyebrows, and Victoria held up one finger and her mother smiled in a way that was small and knowing and retreated without comment. She went back to Seattle on December 27th and spent the last days of the year working on the Hartford plan with a focus that had the particular quality of preparation, the feeling of organizing yourself for something real. And in among that, in the evenings, there was Logan. They went to see a movie on the 28th, the three of them, at the old theater in Fremont that still had the big seats and the sticky floors and the smell of actual butter, not butter flavoring. Maya sat between them and ate popcorn with the systematic dedication of a child completing a task. The movie was animated and loud, and Maya watched it with complete absorption, occasionally gripping Victoria's arm during tense scenes in the way she did without asking permission and without appearing to notice she was doing it. Afterward, they walked to the diner 2 blocks down and had pie because it was late, and neither adult had the energy to suggest anything more sensible. Maya had chocolate cream. Logan had apple because he always had apple. Victoria had the pecan, which she'd never ordered before, and when Maya asked why she'd chosen it, she said she felt like trying something different, and Maya said that's brave, with absolute sincerity, and they left it at that. On New Year's Eve, Logan put Maya to bed early, which Maya accepted under the negotiated condition that she could stay up until 9, at which point she fell asleep watching fireworks coverage on television with Gerald and Geraldine both present, and Logan carried her to bed without discussion. Victoria was in the kitchen doing something that had become, in the past weeks, a natural thing. Being in his kitchen, knowing where things were, making tea without being asked. He came back and sat across from her. She argued for 10 o'clock, he said. And you gave her 9. I gave her 9 because 10 was never going to happen anyway. Strategic. I have learned to negotiate from the realistic position. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the city was working its way toward midnight in the way it did. Distant fireworks testing themselves early, the particular ambient noise of a celebration building pressure. Inside the house, it was warm and still, the kind of still that settled over a place after a child had gone to sleep. January 7th, Victoria said. He looked at her. I booked the flight this morning. I'm going to Hartford January 7th. He nodded once, looked at the table. 12 days. 12 days. Maybe less if Carver makes it easy for me, which he won't. No, Logan agreed. I'll be back the 19th. 20th at the absolute latest. Okay. He turned his coffee mug slightly on the table. I know you need to do it. I know you know that. I'm just saying I know it. He looked up. I also think you're going to walk in there and Carver is going to underestimate you inside of 10 minutes, and that's going to be a problem for Carver. That's generally what happens. And you're going to fix it and come back. That's the plan. Okay. He let out a breath. Okay. She looked at him across the table. The man she'd loved in silence for 6 years, sitting in his own kitchen on New Year's Eve with his coffee and his very specific worry that he was trying not to make into a thing for her to manage on top of everything else. This was one of the things she'd learned, in these weeks of slow the shape of what he held in and what he let out. The way he was, fundamentally, a person who tried not to add to the load of someone he cared about, who sat with his own discomfort quietly rather than putting it on you. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He looked at it, then at her. I will be back on the 19th, she said, and Carver is going to underestimate me, and that will be his error, and I will fix what I go there to fix, and I will come home. He turned his hand over under hers. I know. And while I'm gone, you're going to keep going to work and taking Maya to school and doing the thing where you pretend to eat healthily but actually have cereal for dinner 3 times. I eat well. Logan. I eat adequately. I'm going to call you every day, she said. I know you will. And you're going to pick up on the first ring. I always pick up on the first ring. I know. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. I know you do. Outside, a firework went off somewhere closer than expected, a sharp single pop followed by a cascading sound, and they both looked toward the window automatically. The clock on the wall read 11:53. 7 minutes, Logan said. Do you ever actually stay up for midnight? Absolutely not. A pause. Tonight I will. Because? He looked at her with the expression that had been 6 years forming and that she was still getting used to seeing in full, without the management, without the careful calibration, just the actual thing underneath. Because you're here, he said simply. She thought about 6 years of late calls and first rings and the specific shape of a friendship that had been all along a love that didn't have the right word yet. She thought about Hartford and January and 12 days and the fact that she had, for the first time in a very long time, something she was going to come back to. 7 minutes, she said. 6 now. We can manage 6 minutes. We can manage a lot more than 6 minutes, he said. And the way he said it was not about the new year at all, except that it was entirely about the new year and everything the new year was going to hold and what it meant that they were sitting here in this kitchen together at the end of this particular year that had changed the shape of everything. Outside, Seattle counted down without them. Inside, the kitchen clock moved quietly toward midnight, the old house settling around them, Maya asleep down the hall with 2 elephants and 4 versions of Cumulus and the specific piece of a child who does not know yet what the next year will ask of any of them. They stayed up for midnight, and when it came, quiet and unannounced in the kitchen with cold tea and the sound of the city outside, Logan looked at Victoria and Victoria looked at Logan, and neither of them said anything dramatic because there was nothing left to say that the last 6 weeks hadn't already said. And some things don't need a speech. The new year arrived like most real things do. Without ceremony, without fanfare, just the simple insistent fact of it, present and already underway. She left on a Tuesday. Logan drove her to SeaTac at 5:30 in the morning, which meant waking Maya at 4:45, which Maya accepted with the specific resigned dignity of a child who has been told this is happening and has decided not to fight it. Maya rode in the back seat in her coat over her pajamas, Gerald under one arm, mostly asleep, occasionally opening one eye to confirm the world was still proceeding as reported. The airport at 6 in the morning was its own particular world. The specific population of people who travel at unreasonable hours. The fluorescent light that made everyone look like they were being processed for something. The smell of coffee from the only open kiosk mixing with recycled air. Logan pulled up to the departures curb, and they sat for a moment with the engine running. "Text me when you land," he said. "I will." "And when you get to the hotel?" "Logan." "I'm just saying." She looked at him. He looked at her. In the back seat, Maya had gone fully back to sleep, her head tipped against the window, Gerald's trunk poking out from under her arm. 12 days, Victoria said. 11 and a half, technically, if you land tonight. You've been counting. I've been aware of the timeline he said, which was the same thing, and they both knew it. He got out and pulled her bag from the trunk. She came around and took the handle. They stood on the curb in the January cold with the airport moving around them, people streaming past with their rolling suitcases and their purposeful expressions. Carver is going to walk into that first meeting thinking he knows what he's dealing with, Logan said. Yes. He doesn't know what he's dealing with. No, he doesn't. Good. He looked at her with something direct and specific. Come back on the 19th. Or the 18th if it goes well. Go for the 18th. She picked up her bag. I'll call you when I land. I know you will. She walked into the terminal without looking back, which was not because she didn't want to, but because if she looked back, she would stand there on the curb for another 10 minutes, and she had a flight to catch, and a company division to dismantle and rebuild, and a man named Carver who had no idea what January had in store for him. She did not look back. She looked back once through the glass doors before the crowd closed in. He was still at the curb, hands in his jacket pockets, watching until she disappeared. Hartford, Connecticut, in January, was cold in the particular East Coast way that Seattle's cold never quite was. Sharp and direct, without the Pacific Northwest damp softness, the kind of cold that had an opinion about you. The Sterling Technologies East Coast headquarters sat in a glass and steel building downtown, 13 floors, with the particular mid-2000s aesthetic of a company that had invested heavily in looking modern at a specific moment and then stopped updating. Victoria arrived on Tuesday evening and spent the first night in her hotel reading everything she'd brought and organizing what she knew against what she expected to find. What she expected, a division that had been mismanaged through a combination of Carver's self-interest and the board's willful inattention, numbers that had been dressed up but were fundamentally salvageable, a staff that was probably more capable than their current results suggested, because capable people tended to be suppressed rather than absent in these situations. What she found, walking in Wednesday morning, was all of that, and one additional thing she hadn't fully anticipated, a building full of people who were exhausted in the specific way of workers who have been working hard in the wrong direction for a long time and know it but have no mechanism to say so. She noticed this in the first hour. It was in the quality of how people moved in the hallways. Not lazy, not disengaged, but the particular weariness of effort without traction. She saw it in the way two women in the third-floor open office space went quiet when Carver's name came up in a conversation she wasn't supposed to overhear and that she filed immediately. Carver himself appeared at 9 o'clock. He was 54 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had spent decades in rooms where his size and his confidence and his 18-year tenure did most of the work before he had to say anything. He came into the conference room where Victoria had set up with the handshake of someone who considered himself the host of this situation. Firm, slightly too long, accompanied by a smile that was warm on the surface and evaluative underneath. Ms. Sterling, he sat across from her. We're glad to have you with us. I've had the team prepare a full overview. I've read the overview, Victoria said. A small adjustment in his expression, subtle. Of course. I imagine you have questions. Several. She set her hands flat on the table. Let's start with the Brennan Group. The adjustment happened again, slightly larger this time. The Brennan situation is, I spoke with David Brennan on Monday, Victoria said. Carver went still. She had in fact called David Brennan, the principal at the Brennan Group that Carver had been running his side negotiation with, on the Saturday before she flew out. She had introduced herself, explained that she was taking a direct role in the Hartford division, and asked if he'd be willing to have a frank conversation about the state of the restructure. David Brennan, who was 61 years old and had spent 4 decades in this industry developing an extremely accurate sense of which way a situation was moving, had been very willing. What David Brennan had told her was specific, documented, and considerably worse than what her father had known. Carver had not been running a side negotiation. He had been actively stalling the Sterling Brennan restructure while positioning himself as a future independent consultant to the Brennan Group post-deal, a deal that would have been structured to make that transition possible and that would have cost Sterling Technologies approximately $4 million in value. It didn't know it was giving away. It was not fraud in the criminal sense. Lawyers would argue about that. What it was, without argument, was a betrayal of the specific trust her father had placed in this man for 18 years, and a calculated bet that nobody was paying close enough attention to catch it. She had caught it. She laid it out for Carver now. Not with drama, not with the anger she'd felt when David Brennan had finished talking on Saturday, and she'd sat in her Medina childhood bedroom with the phone in her hand for a full minute before saying anything. She laid it out the way she laid out structural problems, factually, specifically, with documentation referenced by date and source. Carver did not say he didn't know what she was talking about. She respected that marginally. He said instead that the situation was more complicated than it appeared, which was the thing people said when they knew they'd been caught and were buying time to find an angle. It's not complicated, Victoria said. It's very clear. What happens next is also very clear. She opened the folder in front of her. You have 2 options. You resign effective the end of this week with a separation package that the legal team has already drafted, and we handle the Brennan situation through a renegotiated agreement that I conduct directly. Or we proceed through a formal review process that takes longer and ends in the same place with significantly less dignity. She looked at him directly. I'd recommend the first option. Carver looked at her for a long moment. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside the conference room, the building went about its business. Phones and keyboards, and the distant sound of an elevator. Your father, he started, is focused on his health, she said, and is aware of this conversation. He sends his regards. He hadn't exactly, but he'd known it was coming when she'd called him Sunday night and told him what she'd found, and he'd been quiet for a long time, and then said, do what you need to do in the voice of a man processing a betrayal and choosing to keep it contained, and she'd decided that was close enough. Carver took the first option. She spent the rest of Wednesday and all of Thursday and Friday with the actual people of the Hartford division, the managers, the analysts, the project leads who had been working around Carver's misdirection for 2 years with varying degrees of awareness and varying degrees of being able to do anything about it. What she found confirmed what she'd seen in the first hour. This was not a broken team. This was a team that had been pointed at the wrong things by someone whose interests weren't aligned with theirs. She ran 8 meetings in 3 days. She asked more questions than she answered. She listened in the particular way that Logan had, she realized, modeled for her over 6 years without either of them naming it, fully, without agenda, in a way that let people say the true thing instead of the managed one. By Friday evening, she had a clear picture of what the division actually was and what it needed, and the picture was significantly better than the one the numbers had suggested. On Friday night, she called Logan from her hotel room, sitting on the bed with her shoes off and her notes spread across the duvet. Carver's gone, she said. A pause. Already? He took the package. He'll be out by end of business tomorrow. That was fast. I gave him a clear choice and he made it. She pulled her knees up. The division is in better shape than the numbers suggested. The numbers were being managed. The actual people they're good. They've been working in the wrong direction, but the capability is there. So the structure holds, just needed the right load distribution. Exactly. She looked at her notes. I need 4 more days. I've identified someone internally who can take the Hartford lead, a woman named Priya Mehta, who has been running the analysis team, and who has, from what I can tell, Been doing half of Carver's job informally for about 18 months without the title or the pay. When do you talk to her? Monday. She paused. If she says yes, I can be back by Thursday, possibly Wednesday night. Wednesday, he said immediately. It depends on Wednesday, he said again, not pushy, just certain, and she found that she was not annoyed by this, which was its own information. How's Maya? She said. She tried to convince Carol that vegetables were optional because it was January. What did Carol say? Carol said vegetables were not optional, and Maya ate her broccoli under formal protest and then asked for seconds. He paused. She asked about you at dinner last night. What did she say? She said, when is Victoria coming back? And I said the 19th, and she said, that's a lot of days. And I said, yes. And she said, is she okay there? And I said, yes, she's very okay. And she said, okay, good, and then went back to explaining cloud formations to Geraldine. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She's going to be devastated when she finds out you're not actually explaining the trip to Geraldine, she said. I'm absolutely explaining the trip to Geraldine, Logan said, with complete seriousness. Gerald is a little concerned, but Geraldine is taking it well. She laughed. The real one. The one that came from the part of her that the boardrooms never saw. Wednesday, she said. I'll try for Wednesday. She talked to Priya Mehta on Monday morning. The conversation lasted 2 hours, which was longer than she'd planned, because Priya Mehta was the kind of person who, once she understood that the conversation she was in was a real one rather than a performance review, had things to say that were worth hearing. She was 38, sharp, careful, and quietly furious in the way of someone who has been doing significant work without recognition for long enough that she'd begun to wonder if the recognition was ever coming, or if she'd been wrong about the kind of organization she'd joined. Victoria laid out the situation plainly. The division leadership was changing. She needed someone who understood what the Hartford operation actually was, not what it had been reported to be, and who could lead it with the authority it needed going forward. She was offering Priya the role with a title and compensation that reflected what she'd actually been doing. Priya listened to all of it. Then she asked 4 questions, each of which was better than the last, each of which revealed someone thinking about the structure of the role and the organization rather than just the personal opportunity. After the 4th question, she said, "You're going to run this remotely, from Seattle." "Yes." "And I'd have actual authority over operational decisions, not approval chains that route back to real authority," Victoria said, "with agreed parameters and a direct line to me, not a committee." She paused. "I need someone who can make decisions in the room, not someone who has to wait for Seattle to wake up." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I'll do it." Victoria spent Monday afternoon and Tuesday formalizing it. The legal paperwork, the announcement structure, the internal communication plan that needed to thread the needle between being honest about the change in leadership and not creating unnecessary alarm in a team that had already been through enough uncertainty. She worked with Claire remotely, the two of them on a call for most of Tuesday afternoon, building the framework that would hold when Victoria got on a plane. She called her father Tuesday evening. "Priya Mehta," he said when she told him. A pause. "I know that name. She's been running the analysis team. I met her once, at the Hartford office, 3, maybe 4 years ago." Another pause. "She asked me a very good question about the Pacific Northwest distribution model. That sounds like her? I remember thinking she was underutilized. She was extremely underutilized." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Victoria." His voice had the particular quality it had carried since December. Slightly slower, slightly more deliberate, as though he was choosing each thing he said with more attention than before. "You did this in 12 days. 11. 11 days." A breath that she couldn't entirely read. "I spent 9 months not dealing with it." "You were dealing with other things. I was avoiding it." He said it plainly. "I want to be honest about that. I was avoiding a difficult conversation with someone I'd known for a long time, and I let the company pay for that avoidance." A pause. "You didn't avoid it. I had the advantage of not having 18 years of history with him. No, you had the advantage of being willing to see it clearly. He paused. That's you, Victoria. You've always been able to do that. I don't know if I ever told you that. She looked at the Hartford skyline out the hotel window, a city she'd spent 11 days in, and that felt, already, like a problem she'd worked through rather than a place she'd lived. She would leave tomorrow, and it would continue without her, the way things were supposed to when you'd built them correctly. You're going to get better, she said, and you're going to come back to a company that's running better than when you left it. So I need you to focus on that and let the doctors do what they're doing. You sound like your mother. Mom's very smart. She is, he said, with a warmth that she didn't hear from him often and that she'd learned in these past weeks to simply accept rather than analyze. Come see us soon, when things settle. I will, she said. I promise. She booked the Wednesday morning flight before she went to sleep. She texted Logan. Wednesday morning. Landing 11:40. He replied in 40 seconds. I'll be there. You don't have to. Victoria. The airport is out of your way. Victoria. She put the phone down, picked it up again. Okay, he sent back. And then after a moment, Geraldine is relieved. She slept better that night than she had any night in Hartford. Logan was at the arrivals gate with Maya, which she hadn't expected. Maya was in her school coat with her hair in 2 uneven pigtails and was holding a sign that said Victoria in large letters that she had clearly made herself, the V significantly larger than the other letters, the whole thing colored in with what appeared to be every marker she owned simultaneously. Victoria stopped when she saw the sign. Something in her chest did something she didn't try to manage. You're early, she said. Half day, Logan said. Teacher planning. She has strong feelings about airport signs. I made it myself, Maya said, in case this was not clear. Dad said I could. I see that. Victoria crouched down to Maya's eye level. I like the V. The V is the best letter, Maya said firmly. V for Victoria, V for very important. Victoria looked at this child, 6 years old, coat slightly too big for her, hair already escaping its pigtails, holding a sign she'd made with every marker she owned, and felt something that was not a board meeting emotion or a CEO emotion, or even an adult emotion particularly. It was something simpler and more complete than any of those things. Come here, she said, and Maya walked into the hug with the ease of someone who had done this before, or who was doing it for the first time and had no doubt it was correct. And Victoria held her for a moment in the arrivals hall with the airport moving around them and Logan standing there watching with his hands in his jacket pockets. And an expression she had learned in these months meant he was feeling something he wasn't going to try to put into words right now. They went to lunch. Not the Thai place, not the cinnamon coffee place, somewhere new. A diner in Fremont that Maya had been requesting for 2 weeks because it had pancakes available at all hours, which she considered a philosophical position she could respect. The pancakes were good. The coffee was not cinnamon-flavored. Maya ate her pancakes and narrated the 11 days that Victoria had missed, Gerald and Geraldine's ongoing family dynamics, a development in the cloud drawings involving a new formation she had invented and named herself, an event at school involving a misunderstanding about whose turn it was on the swing that had apparently been significant but was now resolved, a book she'd finished that was sad at the end instead of okay, which she had some feelings about. Why was it sad at the end? Victoria asked. Because the dog died, Maya said flatly. I didn't know the dog was going to die. Nobody said. That's rough, Logan said. It was very rough. Maya pointed her fork for emphasis. Dogs should not die in books without a warning at the beginning. That seems fair, Victoria said. I'm writing a letter to the author. Logan looked at Victoria across the table. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that was not entirely about the letter to the author. After lunch, they drove back to the house. Maya fell asleep in the back seat again, the specific car sleep of a child who has been running at full energy and then simply stops, like a phone at 1%. Logan carried her in. Victoria held the door. The house was warm and smelled like it always did. Old wood and coffee and something faintly cinnamon that had nothing to do with the coffee place, just the particular smell of a home that had been lived in by the same people for years. She stood in the hallway while Logan got Maya settled, looking at the house she'd been in 100 times. The cloud drawings on the refrigerator, the coat rack by the door that had 3 coats of different sizes, the photo on the wall of Logan and Maya from 2 summers ago, Maya sitting on his shoulders at what looked like a street fair, both of them laughing at something off camera. She had been in this hallway 100 times. It felt different now, and not different at all, which was the thing about truly belonging somewhere. It didn't announce itself. It just was. Logan came back. They went to the kitchen because they always went to the kitchen. She sat at the table. He made coffee, the familiar geometry of it. "How do you feel?" he asked, setting a mug in front of her. "Tired," she said. "Relieved." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "Good. I feel good. Carver's gone. Priya's in. Your father knows what happened." "Yes." "And the board?" "I briefed them Thursday. Elton Marsh is going to have opinions. He always has opinions. His opinions will be less relevant now that the thing he was trying to avoid is already handled." She looked at the mug. "He can have opinions about a decision that's already been made and is already working. That's a different kind of meeting than having opinions about a plan." "You did that on purpose," Logan said, moving fast enough that the board was approving something already done. "I did it fast because it needed to be done fast," she said. The fact that it also made a certain kind of obstruction impossible was a secondary benefit. A convenient secondary benefit. "I'm a thorough person." He sat down across from her. The kitchen was quiet in the late afternoon way, the light coming through the window at the low January angle. The house settled around them. "Victoria," he said. She looked at him. "I want to talk about something." Her stomach did a small thing, not quite dread, more like the alertness of someone who recognizes a significant sentence. "Okay," she said. He turned his mug slightly on the table, but the same gesture he made when he was organizing something. "I've been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks, while you were gone, about where this is going." He looked at her directly. "About where I want it to go." "Logan, let me finish." She let him finish. "I'm 32 years old," he said. "I have a daughter who already loves you, which is not a small thing. I want you to know that I know it's not a small thing. I have a job I like, and a house with a previously broken pipe, and a genuinely irrational amount of feelings for someone who once drove to Finney Ridge to get me Thai food and stopped at a drugstore for a sewing kit." He paused. I know this is new. I know we said slow. And I'm not asking you to change anything right now. I just want to be clear about something." She waited. "I'm not interested in this being a thing that sits in its lane," he said. "I'm not interested in careful and managed and exactly the right distance. I've had 6 years of exactly the right distance, and it was the right thing for that time, and it cost both of us something." He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "I want to build something with you, actual something, the whole messy real version of it." He paused. "I'm 32 and I know what I want, and I've wasted enough time not saying it." The kitchen was very quiet. Victoria looked at this man, who had driven through rain at midnight, who had let her fix his elephant and his pipe and eat at his kitchen table like she lived there, who had listened to her work through Hartford without trying to solve it for her, who had been at the arrivals gate with a 6-year-old holding a sign, and felt the full weight of 6 years collapsing into one specific moment. She had spent 6 years being careful, and careful had kept the friendship intact and cost her everything underneath it. And then one software glitch and one midnight drive and 3 months of slow had given her something she hadn't let herself name yet, because naming it felt like the kind of thing you did when you were sure, and she was not someone who moved before she was sure. She was sure now. "I want that too," she said. "I've wanted that for 6 years." He looked at her. "I know I said slow," she said. "I meant it. I still mean it. I don't want to rush Maya into anything she's not ready for, and there are things about my life that are—" She paused. "Complicated, in ways that will affect you too if we do this the way I think we're talking about doing it." "I know. My name is public. What I do is public. You're private. That's going to—" "Victoria." He said her name in the way that meant he had heard and understood and was not afraid of it. "I know what I'm signing up for. You think you do. You've been famous adjacent to me for 6 years, he said. I've been to your events. I know what the room looks like when you walk in. I know what the press coverage looks like. I know all of that. He paused. It's not the part I think about when I think about building something with you. What part do you think about? He thought for a moment. This, he said. This kitchen, the cinnamon place, Maya's cloud drawings, Gerald and Geraldine, the airport sign. He paused. The parts that are just us. The actual us. She looked at him. Yeah, she said quietly. Okay, yeah. They stayed at the table until Maya woke from her nap at 4:30 and came padding into the kitchen in her socks, demanding to show Victoria the new cloud formation she had invented, which was called the megacumulus, and which was represented in the drawings by a cloud significantly larger than all other clouds with a crown on it. Victoria examined the drawings with appropriate seriousness. Maya explained the meteorological significance. Logan made a second round of coffee and leaned against the counter and watched his daughter explain cloud formations to the woman he loved, and felt the particular uncomplicated rightness of this. Not perfect, not resolved, not without the complications that were still ahead of them, but right. Genuinely, specifically right. The weeks that followed were not seamless. Nothing real ever is. The board call on Thursday went the way she'd expected. Marsh had opinions, which she'd prepared for, and 2 other members had questions about the Priya Mehta appointment that were reasonable and that she answered directly. The board approved the restructure, and Marsh's opinions were noted and filed and did not change the outcome. Richard Sterling began his second round of treatment in February. Victoria called her mother every Sunday. She flew to Medina twice in the spring, and both times her father was different. Still her father, still opinionated and precise, but slower to fill silences in the way that people sometimes got when they were conserving themselves. She sat with him on the back deck the second visit, and they watched the lake and talked about things that were not the company, which was the rarest and most honest version of any conversation she'd ever had with him. Priya Mehta turned out to be exactly what Victoria had thought she was. By March, the Hartford numbers were moving in the right direction. By April, the Brennan Group restructure, reopened with David Brennan directly, had been renegotiated into something that served Sterling Technologies correctly. By May, Elton Marsh sent Victoria a 3-line email that said, in its entirety, "The Hartford situation has been resolved well. I was wrong to doubt the timeline. Well done." She printed it out and put it in a drawer, not because she was petty about it, but because it was the closest thing to an apology she was going to get from Elton Marsh, and she wanted to remember it. Logan told James in February. James looked at him for a long moment and then said, "The woman you're always on the phone with?" And Logan said yes, and James said, "I knew it wasn't just sleeping more," with the satisfied expression of someone whose instincts have been confirmed. They told Maya in March. Not as a formal announcement, but there was no sitting down conversation that started with "we have something to tell you." It happened the way most real things in Maya's life happened, which was gradually and then all at once. And the moment of actual telling was less a revelation than a confirmation of something she had apparently already decided was true. "Are you and Victoria together now?" she asked Logan one Saturday morning, with the directness of someone who has been patient about asking for a reasonable period of time. Logan looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "We are." And Maya appeared to run some internal calculation. "Is she going to live here?" "Not right now. Maybe someday. That's something we'd all decide together." Maya considered this. "Does she know about the pipe sound?" "She knows about the pipe sound." "Okay." Maya seemed satisfied. "I'm going to tell Geraldine." She went to tell Geraldine. Logan stood in the kitchen for a moment and thought about how he'd been braced for something more complicated than that, and how Maya continued to be, in the most fundamental ways, less complicated than he feared and more right than he deserved. Victoria told her mother on a Sunday call in April. Margaret Sterling listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was not her usual style, and then said, "I want to meet him." "I know." "Not at an event, not with other people. I want to have dinner with him, just him." "Mom, he's raising a child alone, Victoria. He called you at 2 a.m. about a fever. That's a person I want to know." She brought Logan to Medina in May. Her father was having a better stretch. The treatment was working. The doctors were pleased. He was moving more easily than he had in January. He sat across from Logan at the dinner table and asked him 4 questions about structural engineering that were too specific to be polite conversation and that Logan answered correctly and in detail. Her father did not compliment him on this, but he listened, which was the Richard Sterling version of a compliment. Her mother pulled Victoria aside before dessert and said simply, "He's good." "I know," Victoria said. "He looks at you like you're—" Margaret paused. "Like you're not the CEO. Like you're just you." "He's always done that," Victoria said, "for 6 years." Her mother looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has lived long enough to know what that meant. "Don't waste any more time," she said. "You've already wasted quite enough." Victoria thought about arguing with this and concluded her mother would win, as her mother generally did. The summer arrived the way Seattle summers did. Late, golden, briefly perfect before the clouds came back. Logan's firm landed a significant project, a downtown development that was going to occupy the next 18 months and that he'd led the pitch for, which meant a promotion conversation that was finally, tangibly happening. He negotiated, which was something he was not naturally inclined to do on his own behalf, but which Victoria had spent approximately 4 weeks coaching him through with the specific patience of someone who negotiated for a living. "You're worth more than you're asking for," she told him. "I don't want to, Logan, you're worth more. Ask for more." He asked for more. He got most of it. She did not say "I told you so," but she did look at him over her coffee the morning he told her in a way that communicated the same information. Maya turned 7 in August. The birthday party was in Logan's backyard. 7 6-year-olds and 2 7-year-olds running at full speed in the summer heat, a cake that Maya had specified should have elephants on it, and that the bakery had delivered with 2 elephants of clearly different sizes, which Maya identified immediately as Gerald and Geraldine and declared perfect. Victoria came early to help set up and stayed until the last guests left, washing cake plates in Logan's kitchen, while Logan managed the post-party Maya, who was running on sugar and excitement and the particular electricity of a birthday that had gone exactly as planned. Later, when Maya was in bed and the backyard was cleaned up and the house had gone quiet, they sat on the back porch in the summer evening. Seattle in August was the reward for enduring Seattle in February. Warm and still, the sky holding light until late, the city reduced to a gentle ambient sound in the distance. "She had a good day," Victoria said. "She had a great day. The elephants on the cake. She almost cried when she saw them." He said it with the specific, helpless tenderness of a parent whose child is moved by something. She held it together, but she almost cried. Victoria looked at the backyard, the deflated balloons still tied to the fence post, the last of the streamers, the general evidence of celebration. "I keep thinking about something Petra said," she said. "In December, at that dinner." "What did she say?" "She asked if you were kind to me, and I said yes." She paused, and she said that was the only thing that mattered. Everything else was details. He looked at her sideways. "I think she was mostly right," Victoria said. "Mostly. The details are real. The complications are real. The fact that my name is in the paper sometimes and your life changes because of that is real. And the fact that we're still figuring out what this looks like long-term is real." She paused. But she was right about the order. Kindness first. The rest is details. He was quiet for a moment. "You've been thinking about long-term," he said. "I've been thinking about long-term for 6 years," she said. "I'm just allowed to say it now." He turned to look at her. The porch light and the last of the summer evening and the man she'd loved in silence until the silence stopped being the right container for it. "What does long-term look like to you?" he asked. She thought about it, really thought about it. Not the managed version, not the board meeting version, not the version that accounted for all the complications first and got to the actual thing later, just the honest answer. "This," she said, "more of this. Different versions of this as Maya gets older and the company changes and your project finishes and the next thing starts. A house that maybe has room enough for both of us, eventually. Sunday dinners with people we actually like. Hard stretches that we work through instead of around." She paused. "Gerald and Geraldine reaching an advanced age." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. And you waking up with the intention of eating well and having cereal instead, she said. I eat well. Logan, I eat adequately. This is a known issue. It is a known issue, he agreed. He reached over and took her hand, which he did now without ceremony, without it meaning anything more than what it was. Simple, present, his. That sounds good to me, he said. All of it. Even the cereal part? I'm going to continue eating cereal. I know. She looked at their hands. I'm factoring it in. They sat on the back porch while the summer evening darkened slowly around them, the city going quieter in the way it did late on a Saturday, and the house at their backs with Maya asleep inside, and Gerald and Geraldine on the pillow, and the cloud drawings on the refrigerator, and the pipe that no longer made its dying sound. Here is what Victoria Sterling learned, at 30 years old, having spent 6 of them loving someone from exactly the right distance, that the distance is never protection. It feels like protection. It presents itself as wisdom. I'm keeping this contained so it can't hurt me. But what it actually is a way of staying in the same place indefinitely while time keeps moving. You don't protect yourself by keeping the feeling managed. You just get older and more practiced at pretending. And here is what Logan Hayes learned at 32, having spent 6 years searching for a thing he couldn't name in people who weren't it, that you can know someone completely and still not see them clearly, if seeing them clearly requires looking at yourself first. He hadn't been searching for the wrong women. He had been avoiding the right one, because the right one was already his, and losing her would have been the kind of loss he didn't know how to survive. And so he'd kept her where she was, safe, certain, exactly where he'd put her, until a software glitch and a green microphone light did what 6 years of his own courage hadn't. The thing about love that takes a long time is that it doesn't arrive lighter for all that waiting. It arrives heavier, actually, full of everything it collected on the way, all the years and the calls and the bear story and the sewing kit and the dish towel and the first rings. It arrives with a weight that is not burden but ballast. Something that holds you down in the right way. Something that keeps you from blowing off course when the winds show up, which they always show up. 12 days before that August evening, before the birthday cake with the 2 elephants, before Priya Mehta had rebuilt Hartford's numbers, before Richard Sterling's doctors had used the word remission for the first time in a careful, qualified way that his wife had nonetheless wept over in private. 12 days before any of that, Victoria Sterling had stood in an airport arrivals hall and seen a 6-year-old holding a sign made with every marker she owned. V for Victoria, V for very important. She had not planned her life to arrive here. She had planned it to arrive somewhere impressive and controlled and structurally sound, and it had done that too. She had the company and the record and the hard-won things to show for it. But the part that felt most like hers, the part she would have chosen if someone had shown her all the options at the start and said, pick. It was the hallway with the coat rack, the kitchen table, the man who listened, the child who made signs. You could build something out of fear of losing it. Victoria had done that for 6 years. She knew exactly what that felt like and how much it cost. Or you could build something out of the decision to keep it. That was the difference. That was the only difference that, in the end, mattered. On the porch, Logan squeezed her hand once. She squeezed back. The summer night settled in around them, warm and unhurried, and the house held what it held, and that was enough. More than enough, the way real things always are when you finally stop managing them from a careful distance and let them be what they actually are. It was enough. It was, in every way that counted, exactly enough.